I have a question for you. When you watched the end of the Alabasta arc, be honest. Did you want her to jump? We all know the history. Vivi stays behind. She chooses her kingdom. It was the mature choice. But deep down, I know you felt the same thing I did. A sense of loss. The Straw Hats lost a sister that day. But what if we change that? What if I told you that in another timeline, Vivi grabs Luffy's hand? Today, I'm taking you into a reality where the princess of the desert ascends to the sky. But I have to warn you, this isn't a happy fairy tale. By boarding that ship, Vivi walks straight into a nightmare. She has to live with Nico Robin, the woman who destroyed her home. Grab your snacks and settle in. This is the full story of what if Vivi went to Skypiea. The heat of the Alabasta sun was relentless, but the silence on the banks of the Tamarisk River felt heavier. Vivi stood there. Her voice trembled as she spoke into the Den Mushi, broadcasting her farewell to the ship drifting away in the distance. She asked if they would still call her a friend if they ever met again. In our world, Luffy listened silently and raised his arm. But in this world, Vivi looks at the faces of her people. She sees Igaram weeping. She sees her father Cobra smiling with a knowing look in his eyes. A sudden realization hits her like a lightning bolt. Her country is safe. Crocodile is defeated. The rain has returned. Alabasta needs a ruler, yes, but right now it needs healing, and she has spent her whole life fighting for others. For once, just for once, she wants to fight for herself. Vivi drops the Den Mushi. She doesn't raise her arm. She runs. Her legs burn as she sprints across the stone docks. The gap between the pier and the Going Merry is widening. The Straw Hats turn around confused by the sudden silence. They see a blur of blue hair racing toward the edge. With a scream that mixes fear and pure exhilaration, Vivi throws herself into the air. She isn't a rubber man. She isn't a monster like Zoro. She is just a girl. But at that moment, Luffy stretches out a hand. His rubber fingers wrap around her wrist. The momentum slams her into his chest and they tumble onto the deck. Silence falls over the crew. Nami is the first to scream. She tackles Vivi into a hug, tears streaming down her face. Sanji enters a state of hurricane love spinning around the deck. Even Zoro cracks a smirk. Vivi looks back at the shore. She sees her father raising his fist in the air, not in anger, but in triumph. He is letting her go. She is an outlaw now, a pirate. The weight of the crown is gone, replaced by the weight of the endless ocean. But the joy of this reunion is about to be shattered. The crew is celebrating, drinking, and laughing as the ship sails away from the pursuit of the Marines. Vivi is sitting on the railing, feeling the wind in her hair, finally believing that everything is perfect. And then the door to the cabin opens. A tall woman with raven black hair walks out, calmly holding a book. Miss All Sunday, Nico Robin. The music stops. The laughter dies. In the original timeline, Vivi was not there to see Robin join. But here, Vivi is the first to react. The trauma of the last few years explodes. This is the woman who helped destroy her country. This is the woman who mocked her father's death. Vivi doesn't hesitate. She pulls her peacock slashers, the sharp wires humming in the air. She lunges at Robin with killing intent. It is a messy, desperate attack born of pure rage. Robin doesn't even flinch. She blooms two hands from the deck and restrains Vivi, instantly holding her arms behind her back. Zoro and Sanji are ready to jump in, but Luffy holds up a hand. The tension is thick enough to choke on. Vivi is screaming at Luffy, asking why this monster is on their ship. She demands that they throw her overboard. She is crying again, but these are tears of betrayal. This is the first major hurdle of this timeline. Luffy looks at Vivi. He doesn't give a speech about logic. He just says that Robin isn't the enemy anymore. He says that she has nowhere else to go. Vivi looks at her captain. She trusts him more than anyone alive. But this asks for an impossible amount of faith. Robin releases Vivi and sits down calmly, offering a truce. She says she is just an archaeologist looking for history. Vivi stands up, rubbing her wrists. She glares at Robin. She tells Luffy that she will stay because this is her ship too, but she warns him that she will never trust this woman. If Robin makes one wrong move, Vivi promises to kill her in her sleep. The dynamic of the ship shifts completely. Instead of the easy acceptance of the canon timeline, there is a cold war on the deck. Nami is caught in the middle. Sanji is confused. Zoro is watching everything like a hawk. The journey continues. Days turn into weeks. The atmosphere on the Merry is awkward. Vivi refuses to sleep in the same room as Robin. She spends her nights on deck keeping watch. But this vigilance begins to change her. She realizes she is the weakest link on this ship. She saw how easily Robin subdued her. If she is going to be a pirate, she cannot be a liability. She asks Zoro to train her. It starts small, basic conditioning, swinging weights. Zoro is a harsh teacher, but he respects her drive. Vivi isn't training to be the strongest swordsman. She is training to protect her new family from the traitor lurking among them. Then falls the anchor from the sky. The giant galleon crushes into the ocean, and the log pose points up, to the sky. The crew is mystified. They need information. They set a course for Jaya, the island of outlaws. This is where Vivi's diplomatic background clashes violently with the pirate world. In Alabasta, she dealt with rebels and corrupt officials. But Mocktown is different. It is dirty, loud, and lawless. When Luffy and Zoro walk into that bar to ask about the Sky Island, Vivi goes with them instead of Nami. She thinks she can talk to people. She thinks she can reason with them. She is wrong. Bellamy the hyena laughs. The whole bar laughs. They mock the very idea of dreams. They throw bottles and food. Vivi's instinct is to fight back to defend her friend's honor. She reaches for her weapons, but Luffy commands her to stop. He tells her not to fight. Vivi freezes. She watches as Bellamy smashes Luffy into the counter. She watches as they beat Zoro. She is shaking with anger. Why aren't they fighting? These men are weak. Luffy could destroy them in a second. Why is he taking this? They are dragged out of the bar, battered and covered in blood. Outside, she screams at Luffy. She demands an explanation. She asks what kind of pirate lets people walk all over them. And then Blackbeard speaks. The man sitting on the street with his cherry pie looks up. He tells her that the era of dreams will never end. He tells her that Sky Islands exist. Vivi looks at this strange man and feels a chill run down her spine. A darkness that reminds her of Crocodile, but far deeper. But Luffy stands up. He smiles. He tells Vivi that some fights aren't worth fighting with fists. Vivi looks at the bruised face of her captain, and she begins to understand. Being a pirate isn't just about violence. It is about conviction. It is a lesson a princess never had to learn, but a pirate must master. They find cricket. They learn about the knock-up stream. They fix the Mary. The tension with Robin is still there, but it simmers in the background now, overshadowed by the impossible task ahead. They have to catch a vertical current of water to reach the clouds. The plan is insanity. Nami is navigating with panic in her eyes. The whirlpools form. The ocean begins to roar. As the Mary hits the vortex, the sheer scale of the knock-up stream terrifies Vivi. She clings to the railing. This is not political intrigue. This is nature's wrath. The ship blasts upward, riding a pillar of water toward the heavens. The gravity pulls at them. The air gets thin. Vivi looks down and sees the ocean becoming a speck. She looks up and sees the white sea. For a moment, the fear vanishes, replaced by awe. This is adventure. This is why she left the desert. They crash land on the sea of clouds. The white ocean stretches endlessly. The air is hard to breathe. Before they can even process where they are, a masked man glides toward them on a dial-powered skate. The Wiper. He attacks without a word. Zoro blocks him, but the lack of oxygen makes him sluggish. Sanji tries to kick, but he is heavy. Vivi tries to track the enemy, but he moves in 3 dimensions using the air itself. They are out of their element. Just as quickly as he arrived, the warrior vanishes, leaving the crew gasping for air. Then comes the old knight Gonfall and his bird Pierre. He explains the dangers of the sky. He offers protection for a price. Nami tries to haggle, but Vivi steps in. She pays the man. She understands the value of allies in hostile territory. She sees something in the old knight's eyes. A weariness that she recognizes from her father. The burden of leadership. They enter the gate of heaven. They pass through the checkpoint. But they don't pay the toll. The old woman takes their picture. They are branded as criminals of Class 2. They dock the Mary on the shores of Angel Island. The beach is made of soft clouds. The trees are strange. It is a paradise. But Vivi can't relax. Her instincts are screaming. Too much perfection usually hides a deep corruption. While Nami explores the waiver and Luffy plays around, Vivi stays on the ship with Robin and Chopper. This is the moment the timeline shifts again. In the original story, Robin explores alone and finds the map. Here, Vivi is watching her. She follows Robin into the ship's cabin. She demands to see what book Robin is reading. Robin shows her the map of Skypiea. She points out that the island is not natural. She explains her theory about the upper yard. For the first time, they have a conversation that isn't a threat. Vivi listens to Robin's intellect. She realizes that Robin isn't just a killer. She is a genius. They are interrupted by the arrival of the White Berets. the police of the sky. They accuse the crew of illegal entry, of destroying public property, of existing. The crew on the beach starts fighting. Luffy beats up the captain. The charges escalate. They are now Class 1 criminals. The priests of God Enel are coming for them. The decision is made to flee, but before they can, the Mary is seized. The Super Express Speed Shrimp grabs the ship. Luffy, Sanji, and Usopp are left on the shore. Vivi, Zoro, Nami, and Chopper are on the ship being dragged toward the sacrificial altar. Vivi is trapped on a moving ship heading into the heart of enemy territory. She is separated from Luffy. She is stuck with the two people she finds most difficult. Zoro, who is sleeping, and Robin, who she hates, and Nami, who is panicking. As the ship winds through the Milky Road deep into the giant forest, Vivi realizes she has gone from the desert of death to the forest of God. And she has no idea that the man ruling this place possesses a power that makes Crocodile look like a grain of sand. The game of survival has begun, and the Princess of Alabasta is one of the players. The sacrificial altar was not a place of worship. It was a graveyard. The Going Merry sat stranded atop the ancient stone structure, surrounded by a lake of clouds that swirled with a sickly green hue. The silence was absolute. No birds sang, no wind howled, just the eerie stillness of a place designed for death. Vivi stood on the deck, gripping the railing until her knuckles turned white. She looked at the murky water below. A fin sliced through the surface. A sky shark. It was massive, larger than the banana wani she had faced in the desert. She stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. They were trapped. Zoro was asleep. Of course he was. The moss-headed swordsman was leaning against the mast, snoring loudly, completely unbothered by the fact that they were being offered as sacrifices to a self-proclaimed god. Nami was pacing back and forth, muttering about gold and escape routes. Chopper was trembling in his heavy point form, holding a broomstick as if it could protect him from divine wrath. And then there was Robin. The archaeologist was sitting calmly on the stairs reading a book she had found in the ship's library. Vivi watched Robin. The hatred she felt was still there, burning like a coal in her chest, but it was being smothered by a cold layer of pragmatic fear. She walked over to Nami. She asked what the plan was. Nami stopped pacing. She looked at Vivi with desperate eyes. She said they needed to get the ship off the altar, but there was no wind, and the sharks would eat them if they tried to swim. They were sitting ducks. Suddenly, the air pressure changed. It wasn't wind, it was presence. A heat wave washed over the deck. Vivi looked up. High above in the milky white sky, a figure descended. He rode a giant purple bird that breathed fire. It was Shura the Sky Rider, one of the 4 priests of Enel. He didn't land. He hovered, looking down at them with a sneer of arrogant superiority. He held a long lance that glowed with intense heat. Zoro woke up, one eye opened. He sensed the killing intent. Shura didn't waste time with speeches. He thrust his lance and a beam of fire tore through the air, scorching the deck of the Mary. Nami screamed. Chopper panicked. Vivi reacted on instinct. She shoved Nami behind the mast just as the wood splintered where she had been standing. The heat was intense. This wasn't normal fire. It was a heat dial. Shura laughed. He commanded his bird Fuza to burn the ship to ash. The bird opened its beak and a torrent of flames descended. Zoro drew one sword. He cut the air, creating a gust of wind to scatter the flames, but the heat was overwhelming. The ship was made of wood. It was dry. If they didn't stop this, the Mary would be their funeral pyre. Vivi saw Chopper transform into his jumping point. The little reindeer leaped into the air trying to fight the bird. It was brave but foolish. Shura spun his lance and knocked Chopper out of the sky. The reindeer crashed onto the altar stone. Shura dove for the kill. Vivi moved. She didn't think. She pulled her peacock slashers, the jeweled wires extending from her fingers. In Alabasta, she was a princess protecting her people. Here she was a crewmate protecting her family. She whipped the wires forward. They weren't strong enough to block a lance, but she aimed for the bird's eyes. Fuza screeched and banked sharply to the left. Shura missed Chopper by inches. The priest turned his gaze to Vivi. He looked amused. He asked if the little girl wanted to play. He pulled something from his belt. Not a weapon, but a dial. He released it. String cloud. Suddenly, the air around the ship was filled with invisible threads. Zoro tried to move, but his arms were snagged. Nami was trapped against the railing. The strings were sticky and impossibly strong. This is where Vivi's experience changed the fight. She knew wires. She fought with strings. She saw the glint of light on the invisible threads that the others missed. She screamed at Zoro to stop moving. She warned him that the more he struggled, the tighter the knots would become. She threw her own slashers, wrapping them around a mast and using the leverage to pull herself out of the trap's radius. She was the only one free. Shura looked impressed for a fraction of a second before he dove at her. Vivi ran. She wasn't fast enough to outrun a flying bird, but she knew the ship better than he did. She slid under the swing, scrambled up the rigging, and used the elevation to spot the pattern of Shura's strings. She shouted directions to Zoro, guiding his blade to cut the specific anchor points of the trap. It was a desperate dance. A princess versus a priest. But reality is cruel. Shura was simply too strong. He grew bored of the game. He impaled Vivi's shoulder with the tip of his lance. The pain was blinding. A scream tore from her throat as she was pinned to the deck. The smell of burning flesh filled her nose. Shura raised his lance for the finishing blow. Then the sky exploded. A senile old knight on a spotted bird crashed into the fray. Ganfall, the god of the past. He engaged Shura in a jousting match of high-speed aerial combat. It was a blur of steel and fire. In the chaos, the crew managed to free themselves. Chopper tended to Vivi's wound. It was deep, but not fatal. She hissed in pain as he applied the bandages, but her eyes never left the sky. She saw Ganfall fall into the Cloud River. She saw the sharks swarm. She saw the hopelessness of their situation. But Straw Hats do not accept hopelessness. They decided to abandon the ship. They needed to get into the forest. Using the Tarzan swing method carried by the monstrous strength of Zoro, they launched themselves off the altar and into the upper yard. The giant Jack Beanstalk towered over them. The forest was ancient, primitive. It felt like walking into the Jurassic period. They set up a temporary camp deep in the roots of a massive tree. Night began to fall. And in Skypiea, night is not just darkness. It is silence. They were separated from Luffy, Sanji, and Usopp. They had no idea if their captain was dead or alive. Vivi sat by the small fire holding her injured arm. Robin sat opposite her. The firelight danced on their faces. For the first time, Vivi didn't glare. She asked Robin a question. She asked why the trees were so big, why the soil felt like dirt, not clouds. Dirt! Robin looked at the ground. She picked up a handful of earth. She explained her theory. This island wasn't born in the sky, it was part of the earth below. It was shot up here by the knock-up stream. This was Jaya. Vivi listened and the pieces clicked. The storybook she read as a child, Nolan the Liar, the City of Gold. It wasn't a lie, it was here, but it was tragic. A piece of land torn from its home forced into a foreign sky where the very ground became more valuable than gold. The war between the Skypeans and the Shandians wasn't just about territory, it was about home. Vivi looked into the fire. She understood the Shandians. She remembered the rebels in Alabasta fighting for water, fighting for their survival. The Shandians were fighting for their soil, for their ancestors. A tear rolled down her cheek. She realized that Wiper, the man who attacked them, was just a desperate patriot, just like Koza. This perspective shifted everything for her. To Luffy, this was an adventure. To Zoro, it was a fight. To Nami, it was a treasure hunt. But to Vivi, this was a civil war, and she knew the cost of civil war better than anyone. Suddenly, the bushes rustled. Zoro grabbed his swords. But it wasn't an enemy, it was a party. Luffy, Sanji, and Usopp burst through the foliage, laughing and singing, carrying mounds of meat and fruit. The reunion was chaotic and loud. Luffy stretched his arms and wrapped the whole crew in a hug, squeezing Vivi's injured shoulder. She yelped, but she smiled. He was here. The idiot captain was here. They set up a massive campfire. The wolves of the sky, attracted by the smell of food, arrived. But instead of fighting Luffy, tamed them. He partied with them. It was a surreal scene. Pirates and wolves dancing around a fire under the moonlight of a foreign world. Usopp was telling lies to Chopper. Sanji was cooking a feast. Zoro was drinking with the wolves. Vivi sat slightly apart watching them. She felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. This crew, they were insane. They were hunted by God, they were trapped in the sky, and they were dancing. Robin sat down next to her. She offered Vivi a drink. Vivi hesitated. She looked at the cup, then at Robin's face. There was no mockery there, just a quiet offering of peace. Vivi took the cup. She didn't say thank you. She didn't smile, but she drank. It was the first crack in the wall. As the night deepened, the conversation turned to the plan. They needed the gold. They needed to ring the golden bell. They needed to survive. Robin explained the layout of the island. The ruins of Shandora were in the center. Enel was in the back. The survival game was about to begin. Enel predicted that out of everyone on the island, only 5 would survive after 3 hours. Vivi looked at her friends. 5 people. There were 7 of them, plus the Shandians, plus the God's army. The math was brutal. She clenched her fist. She wasn't going to be a statistic. She wasn't going to be the princess who needed saving. Not this time. The sun rose over the white sea, casting long shadows through the giant trees. The air was crisp and cold. The party was over. The hangover was real, but the resolve was harder. They divided into teams. This is where the timeline diverges significantly. In the original timeline, the group split into the Gold Retrieval team, Luffy, Zoro, Chopper, Robin, and the Shipguard team, Nami, Sanji, Usopp. Wait, that's not right. The groups were chaotic. Luffy got eaten by a snake. Here Vivi steps up. She looks at the map. She knows she cannot fight Enel. She knows she cannot fight the priests alone. She needs a team that complements her skills. She is a tactician, a support fighter. The groups form. Luffy runs off immediately. He senses the strongest fighter and goes for the big loud noise. He is a force of nature. Zoro goes right because he thinks it's north. He gets lost instantly. Chopper is left to guard the Mary, which is now hidden in the forest. That leaves Robin, Nami, Sanji, Usopp, and Vivi. Sanji and Usopp decide to sneak onto the Arc Maxim. They want to sabotage the enemy's ship. Vivi looks at Nami and Robin, the navigator, the archaeologist, and the diplomat. It is the brain team. They decide to head toward the ruins of Shandora. They are the ones who can solve the mystery. They are the ones who can find the bell. They set off into the jungle. The trees are so thick they block out the sun. The humidity is oppressive. Vivi walks with her hand on her weapon. Nami is riding the waver she brought from the blue sea, moving slowly over the mossy roots. Robin is walking calmly, observing the ruins that peek out from the vegetation. They don't get far before the ground shakes. A massive shadow blocks out the remaining light. The giant python, the master of the sky. It rises from the canopy, its eyes like yellow moons. It screams a sound that vibrates in their bones. The team scatters. The snake lunges. Nami accelerates the wavers, zooming to the left. Robin sprouts giant hands to swing herself to a high branch. Vivi dives into a hollow log. The snake crashes down, separating them completely. Vivi crawls out of the log, coughing up dust. She is alone. The forest is silent again. She whispers the names of her friends. No answer. She checks her log pose. It's spinning wildly. She picks a direction and starts walking. She needs to find high ground. She walks for 20 minutes until she hears voices. Angry voices. She hides behind a fern. In a clearing ahead, she sees a small Shandian girl, Isa. The girl is clutching a bag of dirt, terrified. Standing over her are 2 of Enel's divine soldiers. They are raising their dial axes to execute her for the crime of existing in the upper yard. Vivi freezes. This isn't her fight. She needs to find her crew. She needs to find the gold. If she interferes, she reveals her position. She risks the survival game prediction coming true. But Vivi remembers Alabasta. She remembers the children crying in the streets of Yuba. She remembers her promise to be a ruler who protects. She looks at Isa. The girl is shaking. Vivi steps out from the bushes. She doesn't scream. She doesn't attack blindly. She spins her peacock slashers, creating a hypnotic humming sound. The soldiers turn, surprised. Vivi smiles a cold royal smile. She asks them if they know the penalty for attacking a child in the presence of a queen. The soldiers laugh. They charge. Vivi doesn't retreat. She runs forward, sliding on her knees under the first axe swing. She wraps a wire around the soldier's ankle and yanks. He trips, falling face first into a patch of explosive purple flowers. Boom! 1 down. The second soldier is smarter. He uses a breath dial to launch a blast of wind. Vivi is blown back, hitting a tree hard. She gasps, the air knocked out of her lungs. The soldier raises his axe. Mantra, Isa whispers. Vivi hears the girl. She looks at Isa. The little girl is pointing to the right. Vivi doesn't question it. She rolls to the right. The axe buries itself in the tree exactly where her head was a second ago. Vivi sees the opening. She sends runbacks, her spinning boomerang weapon. It curves around the tree and smacks the soldier in the back of the head. He stumbles. Vivi closes the distance. She isn't physically strong enough to knock him out with a punch, so she uses his own weapon. She grabs the breath dial from his belt, aims it at his chest, and triggers it. The impact blasts him backward into a rock. He slumps over unconscious. Vivi stands up panting. She looks at her hands. They are shaking. She won. She defeated 2 of God's soldiers. She turns to the little girl. Isa is staring at her with wide eyes. "You have a loud voice," Isa says, referring to the voice of Vivi's spirit. "It sounds like rain." Vivi kneels down. She offers a hand. "I'm Vivi. I'm a pirate." Isa hesitates, then takes her hand. "I'm Isa. I hate God." Vivi smiles. "Good. Me too. Let's go find him." The duo is formed. The princess of the desert and the voice of the jungle. They move deeper into the ruins, unaware that they are walking straight into the territory of the most dangerous priest of them all. The Trial of Iron. Ohm is waiting, and the survival rate is dropping by the minute. The forest of Upper Yard was no longer a jungle. It was a cage. The ruins of Shandora, the legendary city of gold, lay ahead, but the path was blocked by something far more dangerous than trees. White barbed wire stretched across the clearing like a spider web. It looked soft, made of clouds, but it was hard as steel. This was the Trial of Iron, and standing in the center of it, sitting on a giant white dog, was the priest Ohm. He wore sunglasses and held a sword made of iron cloud. He looked bored. To him, human life was just a statistic, a fragility that needed to be broken. Vivi and Isa hid behind a crumbling stone pillar. They were breathing hard. Isa was gripping Vivi's arm, her small nails digging into the skin. She whispered that the voices were disappearing, one by one. The survival game was reaching its climax. Vivi peered around the edge. She saw the devastation. The ground was littered with defeated warriors, Shandians and divine soldiers alike. And in the middle of the carnage, fighting for his life, was Roronoa Zoro. Zoro was struggling, not because the enemy was stronger, but because the terrain was a trap. Every time he tried to dodge, an invisible wall of iron cloud cut him. He was bleeding from a dozen shallow cuts. Ohm was mocking him, swinging his sword which extended like a whip of steel, unpredictable and deadly. The giant dog, Holy, was a trained boxer, punching with shockwaves that cracked the ancient stones. It was a 2-on-1 massacre. Vivi knew she couldn't fight Ohm. His power level was leagues above hers. But she also knew that Zoro was fighting blind. He couldn't see the traps, but Isa could. The little girl's mantra, her observation haki, was painting a map of the battlefield in her mind. Vivi looked at Isa. She grabbed the girl's shoulders. She told her that she needed her to be the navigator, not for a ship, but for a sword. They stepped out. Vivi screamed Zoro's name. The swordsman deflected a blow and looked over, his eye widening in surprise. He shouted at her to run. He told her this wasn't a place for a princess. But Vivi ignored him. She spun her peacock slashers, the wires humming. She didn't aim at Ohm. She aimed at the environment. "Isa, now!" Vivi yelled. "3 steps right! Jump!" Isa screamed, her voice piercing the noise of battle. Zoro didn't hesitate. He trusted his crew. He moved exactly as commanded. A blade of iron cloud slashed the air where his head had been a millisecond before. "Duck! The dog is coming!" Isa cried out. Zoro dropped low. Holy's giant white fist sailed over his head. Zoro used the momentum to slash upwards, forcing the dog back. The dynamic of the fight shifted instantly. It was no longer a duel. It was a coordinated assault. Isa was the eyes. Vivi was the distraction. Zoro was the blade. Ohm frowned. His boredom evaporated. He turned his sunglasses toward Vivi. He realized the weak link was the source of the information. He commanded Holy to kill the girl. The giant dog howled, standing on its hind legs, and charged at Vivi and Isa like a freight train. Vivi pushed Isa behind a wall. She stood her ground. She reached into her pocket. She didn't have a sword. She didn't have a devil fruit. But she had something she picked up in Alabasta, a small vial of concentrated perfume. It was a trick she used in the desert to confuse sand lizards. She smashed the vial on the ground. A cloud of pungent floral scent exploded into the air. Holy, being a dog with a heightened sense of smell, ran straight into the cloud. He sneezed. He clawed at his nose. His eyes watered. He was blinded by the scent. He started punching wildly, hitting the iron cloud fences, hurting himself. It was a comedic but brilliant tactical move. "Zoro, finish it!" Vivi screamed. Zoro grinned. He sheathed 2 swords and gripped the Wado Ichimonji. He focused his own spirit, the breath of all things. He cut through the iron fence. He cut through the whip. He delivered a 108-pound phoenix that sent Ohm crashing through 3 layers of ruins. The priest fell. The iron trial was over. The silence that followed was heavy. Zoro sheathed his sword, panting. He looked at Vivi. He didn't say thank you. He just asked if she was hurt. Vivi shook her head, smiling weakly. They had survived. But the victory was short-lived. The ground began to shake. Not a tremor, an earthquake. The giant beanstalk, Giant Jack, swayed. From the canopy above, the massive blue python plummeted down, crashing into the ruins like a falling building. And inside the snake's mouth, screaming, was Monkey D. Luffy. The snake smashed into the ground, throwing debris everywhere. The chaos drew everyone in. Wiper, the leader of the Shandians, emerged from the dust, his reject dial ready. Ganfall arrived on his horse. Robin and Nami appeared from the forest line. The survivors had gathered. The stage was set. And then, the sky turned white. A beam of lightning, thick as a castle tower, struck the center of the ruins. The sound was deafening. The shockwave knocked Vivi off her feet. When the dust settled, a man was sitting casually on a broken pillar. He was bare-chested, wearing baggy pants with heavy gold drums attached to his back. He was eating an apple. Enel. The pressure he exerted was suffocating. It wasn't just fear. It was biological terror. Every hair on Vivi's body stood on end due to the static electricity in the air. He looked at the gathered fighters. Zoro, Wiper, Ganfall, Robin. He smiled. He checked his pocket watch. He said the time was up. He predicted 5 survivors. There were too many people here. He needed to thin the herd. Wiper attacked first. He shot his burn bazooka. Enel didn't even dodge. The blast hit him and passed right through him. He was lightning itself. Logia. Invincible. Enel yawned. He tapped his drums. A bird made of electricity flew out and incinerated Wiper, sending the warrior crashing into a wall, smoking. Zoro attacked next. He used his strongest technique. Enel caught the swords with his bare hands. Electricity surged through the metal blades. Zoro screamed as millions of volts fried his nerves. He collapsed, twitching. Robin tried to use her clutch, but you cannot clutch lightning. Enel appeared behind her. He touched her head. Yaha! A flash of blue light. Robin fell. In less than a minute, the strongest fighters were on the ground, defeated. Only Nami, Ganfall, and Vivi were left standing. Nami was paralyzed with fear. Ganfall was too old to move fast enough. Enel turned his eyes to Vivi. He tilted his head. He sensed something different about her. Not power, but status. He floated down, his feet hovering inches above the ground. He stopped in front of her. The static made Vivi's blue hair float. "You possess the aura of a ruler," Enel said, his voice calm, echoing as if spoken through a radio. "Are you a queen?" Vivi trembled. Her knees wanted to buckle. Every instinct screamed at her to bow, to beg, to run. But she thought of her father. She thought of the kings of the past. A queen does not bow to a false god. She clenched her fists. She looked him in the eye. "I am a princess," Vivi said, her voice shaking but clear. "And you are not a god. You are just a criminal with a strong fruit." Nami gasped. She couldn't believe Vivi had just insulted the man who one-shotted Zoro. Enel blinked. Then he laughed. A manic, hyena-like laugh. He found it hilarious. He clapped his hands. He told her that he admired her honesty. He offered her a deal. He was going to the fairy Verth, the endless earth on the moon. He needed servants. He told her that if she bowed down and kissed his foot, he would take her and her navigator friend to the new world. Everyone else would die. This was the test. The parallel to Alabasta. Crocodile had offered her safety if she surrendered her country. She had refused then. She refused now. "I would rather die with my friends than live as your slave," Vivi spat the words at him. Enel's smile vanished. His face became a mask of indifference. "A pity," he said. "Then you can watch." He raised his staff, pointing it towards the distant sea of clouds, towards Angel Island, the place where the civilians lived, the place where Conus and her father were. "The game is boring now," Enel declared. "I will restart the world." The sky above Angel Island turned black. Clouds began to swirl, forming a massive sphere of darkness crackling with lightning. "The Raigo, the kingdom come." Vivi screamed. She screamed for him to stop. She realized what he was doing. He wasn't attacking a person. He was erasing a civilization. She ran towards him, throwing her peacock slashers in a futile attempt to stop the inevitable. Enel didn't even look at her. He just released the energy. A pillar of light descended on Angel Island. It was silent for a second, and then the sound arrived. A roar that shattered the eardrums. The island crumbled. The houses, the streets, the port, they collapsed under the weight of the lightning, crashing down into the white sea below. A massive hole was left in the clouds. Vivi fell to her knees. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the destruction. It was her nightmare come true. The bomb in Alabasta all over again. She hit the ground with her fists, screaming in frustration. She thought she had failed. She thought everyone was dead. But then a voice crackled from the tone dial on her belt. It was Conus. "We made it!" Conus's voice was shaking but alive. "The White Berets! They helped us evacuate to the upper yard just in time! Everyone is safe!" Vivi froze. Tears streamed down her face, but now they were tears of relief. They weren't dead. The home was gone, but the people were alive. This realization lit a fire in her chest. Enel had taken their land, but he hadn't taken their lives. Not yet. Enel floated back up to his ark, the Maxim. He looked down, annoyed that his insects were still scurrying about. He announced that he would give them 1 hour of grace before he destroyed the upper yard as well. Vivi stood up. The despair was gone, replaced by a burning resolve. She walked over to Nami, who was still shaking. Vivi didn't shake her this time. She offered a hand. "We aren't dead yet." "But he's invincible," Nami sobbed. "He's lightning. We can't touch him." "We don't need to touch him," Vivi said, looking at the fallen form of Luffy. The snake had been knocked out by the lightning, and its mouth was open. Luffy was crawling out, dazed, confused, and asking why it was so bright. Vivi pointed at Luffy. "We have the natural enemy of lightning. We just need to get him to the Ark." Vivi turned to Robin, who was regaining consciousness. She looked at Ganfall. She looked at the battered body of Wiper. She began to issue orders. She wasn't the strongest fighter, but in this moment of total apocalypse, she was the only one with the mental fortitude to lead. She was the princess of Alabasta, and she was declaring war on God. "Sanji Usopp," she whispered to the wind, hoping they were already on the Ark. "Open the door. We are coming." The final battle was about to begin. Not for gold, not for adventure, but for the right to exist. The clock was ticking. The Ark Maxim was rising, casting a shadow of doom over the ruins of Shandora. The engines of the flying ship hummed with a deep, vibrating frequency that resonated in the chests of everyone left on the ground. Vivi stood amidst the rubble, her blue hair whipped by the updraft. She looked at Luffy. The rubber captain was picking his nose, looking at the floating ship with a confused expression. He didn't understand the physics of electricity. He didn't understand the politics of the war. He just knew that the guy with the long earlobes had hurt his friends. Vivi grabbed Luffy's face, squishing his cheeks. She looked him dead in the eye. She told him that he was the only one, the only thing in this world that could touch that monster. Luffy blinked. He grinned. He punched his palm. He said he was going to kick Enel's ass. It was simple. It was pure. It was exactly what Vivi needed to hear. But getting to the Ark was the problem. It was floating hundreds of meters in the air. The giant jack beanstalk had been severed, its top leaning precariously. Nami revved the engine of the Waver. It was a one-seater, but with the modification of a cloudboard, it could tow someone. Vivi looked at Nami. The navigator was terrified, tears still drying on her cheeks, but her hands were steady on the handlebars. "Get him up there," Vivi ordered. "I will coordinate the evacuation with Robin and Wiper. You are the wind, Nami. Make him fly." Nami nodded. Luffy grabbed the back of the Waver. With a blast of the jet dial, they shot up the side of the giant beanstalk, defying gravity, racing toward the storm. Vivi watched them go. She turned to the injured Wiper. The Shandian warrior was trying to stand, blood pouring from his wounds. He wanted to fight. He wanted to reclaim his city. Vivi knelt beside him. She put a hand on his shoulder. She didn't offer pity. She offered a mission. She told him that the golden bell was at the top of the beanstalk. Enel was trying to take it. If they wanted to hear the song of the island again, they needed to cut the stalk down. They needed to fell the giant to save the soul of Shandora. Wiper looked at this woman from the blue sea. He saw the same fire in her eyes that burned in his ancestors. He nodded. High above, on the deck of the Golden Ark, Enel sat on his throne. He was bored again. The destruction of Angel Island had been satisfying, but fleeting. He watched the small speck approaching from below. A flying bite? He raised a finger. A bolt of lightning, 50 million volts, shot down. Nami screamed. She swerved the Waver hard to the left. The lightning vaporized the cloud they had just been riding on. The heat scorched Luffy's skin, but he didn't let go. He launched himself off the back of the waver, stretching his arm 100 meters, grabbing the railing of the Arc Maxim. He retracted, slingshotting himself onto the deck of the ship. Enel looked at the intruder. He sighed. He stood up, his gold staff tapping the metal deck. He told Luffy that he was a persistent insect. He raised his hand. El Thor. A massive column of lightning crashed down on Luffy. The light was blinding. The sound was like a bomb going off. Enel turned away, expecting a pile of ash. "That tickles," a voice said. Enel froze. His eyes bulged. His jaw dropped so low it nearly hit the floor. The legendary Enel face, the god of Skypiea, who had never known fear, was staring at a boy who was dusting off his shoulder. Luffy stood there, completely unharmed. Rubber, insulator, the natural enemy of lightning. Down below, Vivi saw the flash. She held her breath. But then she saw the shockwave of a punch. Luffy's fist buried deep into Enel's stomach. The god doubled over, coughing up blood for the first time in his life. Vivi let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. It was working. But Enel was not just a fruit user. He was a genius. He realized quickly that lightning wouldn't work. He switched tactics. He used his Mantora to predict Luffy's moves. He used the gold of the ship, heating it up and reshaping it into a trident. He couldn't shock Luffy, but he could burn him and stab him. The fight turned into a brawl. Meanwhile, inside the ship, the sabotage began. Sanji and Usopp had infiltrated the engine room. They saw the gears turning, the dials humming. Usopp was terrified, but Sanji lit a cigarette. He told Usopp that they were going to do something nasty. They started destroying the internal mechanisms. The Ark shuddered. Smoke began to billow from the vents. Enel felt the ship lurch. He was furious. He knew rats were inside his ship. He threw Luffy off the deck, sending him tumbling down toward the clouds below. Luffy grabbed the giant beanstalk, hanging on for dear life. Enel didn't chase him. He had to save his ship. He went inside. He found Usopp and Sanji. This was the moment of tragedy. Sanji told Usopp to run. He stood alone against the god. Enel looked at the cook. He asked for his last words. Sanji took a drag of his cigarette. He thanked him for the light. Enel blasted him with 200 million volts. Sanji fell, charred, smoking, but still standing for a second before collapsing. The Ark stabilized. Enel used his emergency power to restart the engines. He returned to the deck. He was done playing. He looked at the sky. The dark clouds were gathering again. The final Rygo. A sphere of thunder large enough to destroy not just Shandora, but the entire White Sea. He was going to wipe the map clean. Vivi saw the sphere forming. It was blotting out the sun. The pressure was immense. She looked at the giant beanstalk. Luffy was climbing back up, carrying a massive golden ball attached to his arm. A curse Enel had fused to him to weigh him down. But Luffy was using the weight. He was swinging it like a wrecking ball. "Cut it down!" Vivi screamed at the Shandians. "Cut the beanstalk! We have to bring the bell to him!" Zoro, waking up from his stupor, heard the command. He stood up. He grabbed his swords. Wiper stood up. They attacked the base of the giant jack. It was a race against time. The Rygo was descending. The island was beginning to crumble. Luffy ran up the falling tree. He ran vertically, defying gravity, screaming Enel's name. The god floated in the center of his thunder sphere, looking down with contempt. He transformed into his Ragin form, a giant demon made of pure electricity. "Disappear, blue sea monkey!" Enel roared. Luffy leaped. He spun his body. The golden ball on his arm spun with him. "Golden rifle!" He punched into the thundercloud. The rubber neutralized the electricity. He scattered the storm. He flew through the lightning and drove his fist, encased in gold, straight into Enel's face. The impact was cataclysmic. Enel's teeth shattered. His nose broke. The force of the punch launched him backwards, smashing him into the golden bell that sat at the very top of the ruins. Clang. The sound was not a noise. It was a feeling. A pure resonant ring that cut through the chaos. The golden bell of Shandora rang. The sound wave traveled through the clouds. It traveled down the beanstalk. It traveled through the White Sea, down the waterfall, all the way to the blue ocean below. Mont Blanc Cricket, sitting on the coast of Jaya, heard it. He looked up, tears streaming down his rugged face. The city of gold was in the sky. His ancestor wasn't a liar. The romance was real. On the floating island, the war stopped. The Shandians dropped their weapons. The Skypieans fell to their knees. The song of the island, which had been silent for 400 years, was singing again. Vivi stood amidst the falling petals of the clouds. She watched Luffy fall from the sky, exhausted, caught by Nami on the waver. She looked at the ringing bell. She closed her eyes and listened. In the desert of Alabasta, rain was the sound of salvation. Here, it was a bell. The aftermath was a blur of celebration and relief. The Arc Maxim crashed in the distance, though Enel, stubborn as a cockroach, managed to pilot a piece of it toward the moon, fulfilling his own twisted dream. The crew gathered around a campfire that night. But this was different from the first night. The Shandians were there. The Skypieans were there. They were drinking together, dancing around the fire. Vivi sat next to Wiper. The warrior was bandaged from head to toe. He passed her a flask of Sky Sake. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The respect was mutual. She had led his people when he couldn't. She had helped save his home. Robin walked over to the ancient poneglyph that was embedded in the gold of the bell. She read the inscription. She found the message from Gold D. Roger. I was here, and I will lead this text to the ends of the earth. Vivi stood beside her. History isn't just about the past, is it? Vivi asked. Robin smiled, a genuine soft smile. No, it is a thread that connects us to the future. The next morning, the looting began. The Straw Hats were pirates, after all. They stuffed their bags with gold, but Vivi, being the diplomat, negotiated a trade. They left behind dials from the Blue Sea and supplies, and in exchange, the Skypieans gave them food, water, and gold. Lots of gold. Getting down from the sky was just as terrifying as getting up. They used the balloon octopus. The Mary fell through the air, drifting down from the clouds. As they descended, the crew looked back at the sky. It looked peaceful now. The shadow of God was gone. They splashed down into the Blue Sea. The impact shook the ship. They were back. The smell of the salt ocean filled their lungs. They were home. But they were changed. Vivi leaned against the railing, looking at her log pose. The needle was resetting. She looked at her hands. They were calloused from the wires. She had fought a priest. She had commanded an army. She had stared down a god. The princess who left Alabasta was gone. In her place stood a pirate. But the ocean is not kind. As they celebrated their return, a long shadow fell over the Going Merry. A ship appeared on the horizon. A ship with a distinct Jolly Roger. A grinning skull with a line through it. The Foxy Pirates? No, that would be a joke. This was worse. 3 tall pillars of ice rose from the sea. A man was riding a bicycle across the ocean. Aokiji, Admiral of the Navy. The laughter on the Mary died instantly. Robin froze, her face turning pale white. The trauma of Ohara resurfaced in a heartbeat. Vivi sensed the shift. She looked at the tall man who lazily got off his bike and walked onto their ship. Arara, Aokiji drawled, looking at the crew. You have an interesting roster here. The demon, child, and the missing princess of Alabasta. Vivi's heart stopped. The world government knew. Of course they knew. You cannot disappear from a kingdom and become a pirate without consequences. The admiral looked at Vivi with cold, lazy eyes. Your father is worried, princess, Aokiji said. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here to check on the seed of destruction you are carrying. He pointed at Robin. The encounter with Aokiji in the original timeline was a wake-up call. It showed Luffy that he wasn't strong enough. But here, the stakes are different. Aokiji isn't just threatening Robin. He is threatening the political stability of the world by exposing Vivi. Luffy stepped forward. He didn't care about politics. Get off my ship, Aokiji sighed. I'm not in the mood to work, but duty calls. He froze the ocean. He challenged them. The fight was short. It was brutal. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji were frozen instantly. The gap in power was absolute. Vivi stood there, her weapons useless against ice. Aokiji walked up to her. He loomed over her. You are playing a dangerous game, Nefertari, he whispered. The path you chose leads to war, not just with pirates, but with the world itself. He spared them. Why? Because of a whim. Because he owed Garp a favor. Because he wanted to see where this chaotic timeline would lead. He shattered the ice holding Luffy, non-lethally, and rode away on his bike. The crew was left shivering on the deck, defeated, humbled. They had conquered the sky, only to be crushed by the sea. Vivi helped thaw out Robin. She held the archaeologist close, sharing her body heat. Vivi grabbed Robin's face. You are not a curse. You are my Nakama. And if the world wants a war, Let them come. But the damage was done. The seed of doubt was planted. And the ship, the poor going merry. The fall from the sky and the freezing ice had pushed the keel to its limit. The ship was groaning. It was dying. They needed a shipwright. They needed repairs. The log post pointed to the next island, a bustling metropolis of water and trains. Water 7. As the Mary limped toward the city of carpenters, Vivi had a sinking feeling. She had survived the desert. She had survived the sky. But the greatest tragedy was waiting for them in the city of water. The crew was about to break apart. And this time, a simple speech wouldn't fix it. Usopp was looking at the keel with haunted eyes. Robin was looking at the horizon with resignation. And unseen by them all, the agents of CP9 were already waiting in the shadows of the Galley Law Company, holding a file with 2 photos, Nico Robin and Nefertari Vivi. Hello everyone, welcome to a brand new What If. Today we're going to talk about what would happen if Vivi went to Water 7. Grab your snacks and settle in. They say a ship is just wood and nails until it carries a dream. But what happens when the wood rots and the nails rust? What happens when the dream becomes too heavy for the vessel to carry? We are entering the darkest chapter of the Straw Hat Saga. In the original timeline, the crew faced the internal collapse of their family. But in this timeline, they have Nefertari Vivi. You might think having a diplomat on board would fix the communication problems. You might think a princess could stop the fighting. You are wrong. Having Vivi in Water 7 doesn't save the crew from heartbreak. It only raises the stakes. Because now the world government isn't just hunting a demon from Ohara. They are hunting a traitorous queen. The city of water is about to become a city of fire. The sea train chugged across the ocean surface, creating ripples that disturbed the reflection of the blue sky. The Going Merry limped alongside the tracks. The ship was in bad shape. The keel was groaning with every wave a sound that made Usopp flinch as if he were the one in physical pain. Vivi stood on the deck leaning against the railing. She wasn't looking at the magnificent fountain city rising from the ocean. She was looking at her friends. The encounter with Admiral Aokiji had left a scar on their morale. They were alive, but they felt fragile. Vivi touched the wood of the railing. She whispered a quiet apology to the ship. She had learned a lot about sailing since Alabasta, but she wasn't a shipwright. None of them were. That was why they were here. Water 7, the metropolis of shipwrights. They docked at the outskirts of the city. The sheer verticality of the place was breathtaking. Canals replaced roads, and strange creatures called Yagara bulls swam through the streets carrying people on their backs. It looked like paradise, but Vivi felt a knot in her stomach. As a royal, she knew how politics worked. A city this large and this independent was a hotbed for spies. She pulled her hood up, covering her distinct blue hair. She told Luffy to keep a low profile. Luffy laughed and immediately stretched his arm to grab a bull Yagara. So much for subtlety. The crew split up. This is the first major divergence. In the original story, Nami, Luffy, and Usopp went to exchange the gold while Robin went shopping. Here, Vivi changes the dynamic. She knows they have a massive amount of gold from Skypiea. She knows Nami is a great haggler, but Vivi is a trained negotiator. She decides to go with Nami and Luffy to the bank. She leaves Usopp and Zoro to guard the ship. She leaves Robin alone. This is a mistake. While Vivi is at the bank using her royal etiquette to secure a better exchange rate for the gold, Robin is walking the streets alone. A masked figure in a white suit walks past her. CP9, he whispers. Robin freezes. In the original timeline, they threatened the crew, but here the agent adds a new weight to the scale. He mentions Alabasta. He mentions that the Nefertari bloodline has betrayed the creators of the world. He tells Robin that if she doesn't cooperate, they won't just bust her call the Straw Hats. They will burn Alabasta to the ground. Robin is paralyzed. She isn't just protecting Luffy anymore. She is protecting Vivi's entire kingdom. The burden on her shoulders doubles instantly. Meanwhile, at the Galley Law Company shipyard, the mood is light. Luffy is amazed by the giant shipwrights. Kaku, the man with the square nose, flies through the air, jumping off buildings. It seems like a circus. Vivi watches Kaku with a critical eye. She recognizes the movement. It isn't just athleticism. It is efficiency, military efficiency. She feels a chill, but she dismisses it. They are just shipwrights, she tells herself. They meet Iceberg the mayor. Vivi respects him immediately. He is a man who loves his city. They ask for the repairs. They show the gold. 300 million berries. It is a fortune. Iceberg smiles but says he needs to check the ship first. Kaku goes to inspect the Mary. The wait is excruciating. Vivi sits on a bench outside the shipyard with Nami. They talk about what they will do with the money. Nami wants to buy furniture. Vivi suggests buying books and perhaps a better medical bay for Chopper. They are dreaming of the future. Then Kaku returns. He doesn't smile. Iceberg walks out with him. The mayor crosses his arms. He looks at Luffy. He delivers the sentence that shatters the world. The Going Merry cannot be fixed. The keel is broken. The spine of the ship is snapped. If they sail to the next island, the ship will sink before they reach the horizon. Luffy refuses to believe it. He yells. He bargains. He offers all the money. Vivi steps forward. She uses her diplomatic voice. She asks if there is any way, any wood, any reinforcement. She pleads with the desperation of someone who knows what it means to lose a home. Iceberg looks at the princess. His eyes are cold but honest. He tells her that a true captain knows when to let go. He tells her that sailing on that ship is a suicide pact for her crew. The walk back to the ship is silent. The bag of gold feels heavy in Luffy's hands. But the heaviest thing is the news they have to deliver to Usopp. Usopp, who loves the Merry more than anyone. Usopp, who repairs the ship every night with clumsy hands and desperate hope. When they arrive at the rocky cape where the Merry is docked, they find the ship empty. The guard duty was abandoned. The Frankie family had attacked. Zoro is there waking up from a nap having cut down a few thugs, but he says Usopp was taken. They took the money. Luffy's eyes go dark. He doesn't care about the ship repairs anymore. He cares about his sniper. He cares about the gold. He runs toward the Frankie house. Vivi runs with him. She pulls out her peacock slashers. This isn't a diplomatic mission anymore. This is a rescue. They storm the Frankie house. It is a massacre. Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Chopper destroy the building. Vivi fights. Alongside them, covering their backs using her wires to trip the thugs. They find Usopp beaten to a pulp. The money is gone. All of it. They carry Usopp back to the ship. He wakes up wrapped in bandages. He asks about the gold. He asks about the repairs. The atmosphere on the deck is suffocating. Luffy looks down. He can't look Usopp in the eye. He has to tell him two things. First, they lost the money. Second, the ship is dying. Luffy chooses the worst possible way to say it. He is blunt. He says they are getting a new ship. Usopp freezes. He thinks Luffy is joking. He looks at Vivi for confirmation. Vivi bites her lip. She can't lie. She nods slowly, tears forming in her eyes. That nod breaks Usopp. He thinks they are abandoning the Merry because it is weak, just like him. He thinks they are abandoning him because he lost the money. The insecurity that has been building up since the start of the journey explodes. He yells at Luffy. He challenges his captain. Vivi tries to intervene. She steps between them. She grabs Usopp's arm. She tells him that it isn't about strength. It is about safety. She tells him that Iceberg said the ship would sink, but Usopp pulls away from her. He looks at Vivi with betrayed eyes. He asks her if she would abandon Alabasta if it was broken. The question hits Vivi like a slap in the face. She steps back shocked. Usopp challenges Luffy to a duel, for the Merry, for his pride. The sun begins to set over Water 7, painting the city in blood orange light. The crew stands on the shore. Vivi is shaking. In Alabasta, she stopped the rebel army. She stopped a civil war. But she cannot stop this. She watches helplessly as her captain and her sniper prepare to kill each other. And in the shadows of the city, the agents of CP9 are watching too. They see the fracture, they see the weakness, and they smile. The assassination of Iceberg is set for tonight, and they have the perfect scapegoats. The wind howled across the rocky cape of the shipyard graveyard. It was a mournful sound, as if the ocean itself was crying for what was about to happen. Luffy stood on the shore, his straw hat shading his eyes. Usopp stood opposite him, clutching his slingshot, trembling not with fear but with adrenaline and sorrow. Vivi stood on the sidelines, her hands covering her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She took a step forward, intending to stop them to scream that this was madness, but Sanji put a hand on her shoulder. The cook didn't look at her. He looked at the ground, smoking his cigarette with a grim intensity. He told her quietly that this was a duel between men. If she interfered now, she would insult Usopp's resolve. The fight began. It wasn't the comical skirmish everyone expected. Usopp fought with terrifying ingenuity. He used rotten eggs. He used breath dials. He used caltrops. He knew Luffy's weaknesses better than anyone. He blasted Luffy with explosions. He tricked him with shurikens. For a moment, it looked like the weakling might actually win. Vivi watched with wide eyes, realizing that Usopp wasn't weak. He was just afraid. And now that his fear was replaced by desperation, he was formidable. But reality is absolute. Luffy took the hits. He walked through the fire. He stretched his arm back. He just used the raw brute force of a captain who has to put down a mutiny. The Gomu Gomu no bullet hit Usopp in the stomach. The sound of the impact echoed through the shipyard. Usopp collapsed, coughing up blood. Luffy picked up his hat. He didn't look back at his fallen friend. He whispered that the ship was Usopp's to do with as he pleased. Then he walked away. He walked past Vivi. She saw his face. It wasn't the face of a victor. It was the face of a man who had just ripped out a piece of his own heart. Tears were pouring down Luffy's face, but he didn't make a sound. Vivi looked back at Usopp lying in the dirt, then at Luffy walking into the darkness. She was torn. The crew was broken. The ship of dreams was now a wreckage of broken friendships. She ran after Luffy. She caught up to him and grabbed his arm. She asked him why it had to be this way. She asked if they could talk it out. Luffy stopped. He looked at the princess. He told her that being a captain isn't about being fair. It's about being decisive. He told her that if he wavered, the crew would crumble. That night, the crew stayed at a hotel in the city, but the silence was deafening. Usopp was gone. The Mary was gone. And then they noticed the third absence, Nico Robin. The next morning, the city was in an uproar. The headlines screamed the news. Iceberg, the mayor and head of Galley Law, had been shot. He was in critical condition, and the witnesses claimed the attackers were pirates. Vivi read the paper, her hand shaking. She had a bad feeling. A political instinct honed in the courts of Alabasta. Assassination attempts on leaders usually meant a coup or a cover-up. She told Nami and Chopper that they needed to find Robin immediately. She feared Robin might be involved, or worse, that she was a target. They searched the streets of Water 7. The Yagra bulls were moving sluggishly, the water levels rising with the approaching Aqua Laguna storm. The sky was turning a bruised purple. It was in a narrow back alley that Vivi found her. Robin walked out of the shadows wearing a mask that covered her eyes. Vivi called out to her. She ran toward her friend, relieved. She started to say that they were worried that they could protect her, but Robin didn't smile. She didn't open her arms. She stood there cold and distant like a statue of ice. Robin spoke. Her voice was devoid of the warmth she had shown in Skypiea. She told Vivi to stay back. She said that she could not stay with the crew anymore. She said that her existence was a sin and that being with them would only bring darkness to the Straw Hats. Vivi froze. She recognized this tone. It was the same tone she herself had used in Alabasta when she tried to push the crew away to save them from Crocodile. She realized instantly that Robin was lying. She wasn't leaving because she wanted to. She was leaving to protect them. Vivi took a step forward, defiant. She told Robin that she knew she was lying. She reminded her of the poneglyph in the sky. She reminded her of the bond they formed. She demanded to know who was threatening her. Was it the government? Was it the man in the mask? Robin looked at the princess. For a second, the mask cracked. A flicker of pain crossed her face. But then she leaned in close and whispered the words that froze Vivi's blood. She mentioned Cobra. She mentioned Alabasta. She told Vivi that if she didn't walk away right now, the Buster Call wouldn't just target the crew. It would target the Desert Kingdom. Vivi gasped, stepping back. The threat was perfect. It targeted her weakness. Robin turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, leaving Vivi standing alone in the rain, paralyzed by fear and confusion. But there was no time to process the heartbreak. The city was turning against them. The citizens believed the Straw Hats were the assassins. A mob was forming outside the hotel. Luffy decided they needed to clear their names. They needed to talk to Iceberg. They infiltrated the Galley La Mansion that night. It was a fortress. Shipwrights were patrolling everywhere. Vivi moved with the group, relying on her stealth training. She wasn't a powerhouse like Zoro, but she was fast and quiet. They reached Iceberg's room. The mayor was lying in bed, bandaged and weak. When he saw the Straw Hats, he didn't call for guards. He just looked at them with disappointment. He asked why. He asked why Nico Robin had pulled the trigger. Luffy's eyes widened. He denied it. He yelled that Robin would never do that. But Iceberg was certain. He saw her face. He saw the demon child. Suddenly, the window shattered. Smoke bombs filled the room. Chaos erupted. Figures in masks burst in. It wasn't the Straw Hats. It was the real assassins coming back to finish the job. Luffy attacked blindly, swinging his fists into the smoke. Zoro drew his swords, clashing with a man who used legs like blades. Vivi was pushed into a corner, coughing. Through the smoke, she saw a figure standing over Iceberg, a woman in a mask. Vivi screamed Robin's name. The woman turned. It was her. It was Robin. She looked at Vivi with dead eyes. She didn't say a word. She just raised her hand and used her fruit power. Clutch! Vivi felt hands sprout on her back. She was slammed into the wall, pinned helplessly. She watched as the other masked figures revealed themselves. One of them took off his mask. It was Lucci, the pigeon guy. Another was Kaku, the jumping shipwright. Khalifa, the secretary. Blueno, the bartender. The betrayal was absolute. The people they had trusted, the people of this city, were the enemy. They were CP9, the secret intelligence agency of the world. Lucci looked at the pinned straw hats. He spoke with a terrifying calm. He explained that they had been undercover for 5 years to find the blueprints for the ancient weapon Pluton, and now they had what they wanted, or at least they knew where it was. Luffy tried to charge at Lucci. He screamed that he didn't care about weapons. He just wanted his friend back. Lucci didn't even move. He simply transformed. His body grew fur. His muscles expanded. The Leopard Man. The fight that followed wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Luffy was thrown through a wall. Zoro was kicked into the ocean. Sanji was beaten down. Vivi watched from her pinned position, horrified. This wasn't like Enel. Enel was arrogant. These monsters were efficient. They were professional killers. Lucci walked over to Vivi. He looked at the princess pinned to the wall. He adjusted his top hat. He told her that her existence was an inconvenience. He raised a clawed finger to her throat. Robin intervened. "Wait!" Lucci paused. He looked at Robin. "We have a deal," Robin said, her voice trembling slightly. "The Straw Hats stay alive. That was the deal," Lucci scoffed. He lowered his hand. He grabbed Vivi by her blue hair and threw her across the room. She crashed next to the unconscious Luffy. "Very well," Lucci said. "They will live. For now. The Aqua Laguna will wash the trash away." The CP9 agents vanished, taking Robin with them. They jumped out the window, disappearing into the storm. Vivi lay on the floor of the burning mansion. Her body ached. Her head was spinning. She looked at Luffy, who was stuck between two buildings. She looked at the raging storm outside. They had lost everything. They lost the Mary. They lost Usopp. They lost Robin. And they had been utterly defeated by the government. The building began to collapse. Fire spread through the hallways. Vivi knew she couldn't carry Luffy alone. She needed help. She crawled toward the window, looking for a way out, looking for hope. But all she saw was the dark wave of the Aqua Laguna rising on the horizon, ready to swallow the city whole. This was the rock bottom, the point where most crews would disband. But Nefertari Vivi was not going to let this be the end. She reached for her belt, finding the one thing she had left, a small dial from Skypiea, a recording dial. She pressed the button. "We aren't dead yet," her own voice from the past whispered back. She clenched the dial. She wiped the blood from her face. She had to wake up the captain. She had to find Nami. They had to chase the train. Because if there was one thing she learned in the desert, it was that the rain always comes after the drought. But first, they had to survive the tsunami. The sound of the Aqua Laguna was like a beast growling at the door. The massive wave was minutes away from swallowing the lower districts of Water 7. Vivi woke up on the cold stone of the shipyard outskirts. Her body screamed in protest. She had been thrown by Lucci, bruised by the collapsing building, and nearly drowned in the rising tide. But pain was a luxury she couldn't afford. She sat up, coughing out seawater. Beside her, Nami was already moving. The navigator was frantic, checking the time, checking the wind. They had survived the fire, but they were running out of time. They found Iceberg again. The mayor had woken up, miraculously surviving the burning mansion. Nami grabbed him by the collar, desperate, demanding to know the truth. Why did Robin do it? Why did she betray them? Iceberg looked at the two women. He saw their desperation. He finally spoke the words that changed everything. He told them that Robin had traded her life for the safety of the 6 Straw Hats. She was going to Enies' lobby, the island of justice, to die so that they could sail away. Vivi felt the ground drop out from under her. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a sacrifice. Robin was doing exactly what Vivi had tried to do in Alabasta. She was trying to carry the weight of the world alone. Vivi clenched her fist so hard her nails drew blood. She looked at Nami. They didn't need to speak. The plan had changed. They weren't running away. They were chasing that train. But first, they had to find the idiots. They found Luffy wedged between 2 brick buildings in the downtown area, stuck fast, snoring while the water rose around his ankles. It was a ridiculous sight. Nami screamed at him. She told him the truth. She yelled that Robin was lying to save them. Luffy woke up instantly. The goofiness vanished. He broke the buildings apart with sheer brute force, shattering the bricks. He didn't say a word. He just looked at the tracks leading out to sea. His resolve was back. He wasn't confused anymore. He had a target. They gathered the crew. Zoro pulled himself out of a chimney. Don't ask. Sanji was missing, having already snuck onto the departing sea train to chase Robin. Chopper carried the battered body of Usopp? No, Usopp was gone. But they found a letter, a farewell note. They rushed to the station, but the puffing Tom was gone. The sea train had left, carrying Robin, Frankie, and the CP9 agents toward the gates of hell. The storm was now crashing against the seawalls, waves as tall as skyscrapers. There were no ships that could sail in this. It seemed hopeless. Then Kokoro, the drunken station master, laughed. She pointed to a sealed warehouse. She told them there was another train, a prototype, a failed experiment, the Rocket Man. When the doors opened, Vivi stared at the mechanical beast. It wasn't elegant like the Puffing Tom. It looked like a shark made of steel and steam. It had no brakes. It was a suicide machine. Luffy loved it immediately, but they weren't the only ones chasing the train. The Frankie family arrived, beaten and bloody, demanding to save their boss. The Galley-Law shipwrights, Polly, Lulu, Tilestone, arrived, wanting revenge on CP9 for shooting Iceberg. In the original timeline, this was a chaotic alliance formed by circumstance. Here, Vivi solidifies it. She stood on the front of the Rocket Man. She looked at the thugs and the carpenters, two groups that hated pirates. She raised her voice above the storm. She didn't speak like a pirate. She spoke like a queen. She told them that they all had the same enemy. She told them that tonight, flags didn't matter. Only the destination mattered. Her leadership turned a mob into an army. They roared in agreement. They piled onto the train, hanging off the sides, holding onto King Bulls. The Rocket Man launched. It didn't just drive, it flew. It smashed through the Aqua Laguna wave in a moment of pure physics-defying madness. The crew held on for dear life as the train skipped across the water, the tracks disappearing beneath the storm. Inside the cabin, the mood was tense. Nami was navigating the impossible route. Zoro was meditating, preparing to cut steel. Luffy was eating, fueling up for the fight of his life. Vivi sat by the window, watching the dark ocean blur past. She was worried about Sanji. He was alone on the enemy train. And then the door to the cabin opened. A strange figure stepped in. He wore a yellow cape and a ridiculous mask with long nose holes. He carried a giant slingshot. He introduced himself in a singing voice. "I am Soja King, the king of snipers from Sniper Island." Luffy and Chopper's eyes sparkled. They believed him instantly. They asked where Sniper Island was. "In your hearts," Soja King replied. Nami and Zoro rolled their eyes, instantly recognizing the long nose and the shaking knees. It was Usopp. He couldn't face them as a crewmate, so he came as a hero. Vivi looked at him. She felt a lump in her throat. She knew how much pride it took for him to come back, even in disguise. She didn't expose him. She didn't roll her eyes. She stood up and bowed politely. "It is an honor to have your aid, Sir Soji King," Vivi said, playing along with a gentle smile. Under the mask, Usopp blushed, grateful that she didn't blow his cover. The tension in the room evaporated. The team was complete. Well, mostly complete. The journey was a gauntlet. The Rocket Man caught up to the rear cars of the Puffing Tom. Battles erupted on the tracks. Captain T-Bone, the ship cutter Marine, stood in their way, slicing the sea itself. Zoro went out to meet him. It was a duel of conviction amidst the spraying waves. Zoro's heavy slash blew the Marine into the ocean. Inside the train, Vivi wasn't idle. She acted as the communication hub. She used the baby Den Den Mushi to coordinate with Sanji, who was wreaking havoc on the forward train. Sanji reported that he had freed Frankie and Usopp, Soga King, was moving to help. Vivi relayed the info to Luffy. Robin is in car number 2. CP9 is guarding her. Sanji is making a path. But the enemy was strong. The Rocket Man had to jump a broken section of the track. It flew through the air, soaring over the whirlpools. For a moment, they were weightless. Vivi looked ahead. The storm clouds were breaking. And there, looming in the distance, was the destination. Enies Lobby, the island that never sleeps. A massive fortress suspended over a giant void, guarded by the massive gates of justice. It was the symbol of the world government's absolute power. No pirate crew had ever invaded it and lived. Luffy walked to the front of the train. The wind whipped his red vest. He didn't look scared. He looked impatient. Vivi stood next to him. In Alabasta, she had fought to stop a war. Here, she realized with a chilling clarity, she was about to start one. She looked at the world government flag fluttering atop the Tower of Law. "Are you ready?" Luffy asked, not looking at her. "No," Vivi admitted honestly. She tightened her grip on her weapons. "But I'm going anyway." The Rocket Man crashed onto the solid ground of the island. The wheels screeched. Dust flew. The alliance of pirates, thugs, and shipwrights poured out, weapons drawn. In front of them stood thousands of Marines. Giants. The elite forces of the world. Vivi took a breath. This was it. The point of no return. They weren't just saving Robin anymore. They were challenging the world. Have you ever wondered what the price of a soul is? In the world of pirates, it is usually measured in gold or berries. But today, the price is much higher. The price is a kingdom. When Nefertari Vivi stepped off that sea train, she wasn't just risking her life. She was risking the safety of every man, woman, and child in Alabasta. By attacking Enies' lobby, she wasn't just a pirate saving a friend. She was a monarch declaring war on the world itself. This is the moment where the political landscape of the Great Pirate Era shatters completely. The dust from the crash of the Rocket Man hadn't even settled before the chaos began. The Steel Shark train lay twisted amidst the rubble of the front gates, steam hissing like a dying beast. From the wreckage emerged an army. It wasn't organized. It wasn't disciplined. It was a chaotic storm of shipwrights, street thugs, and a handful of pirates. And at the front of them stood the Straw Hat crew. Luffy didn't wait for a speech. He didn't wait for a plan. He sensed the strongest presence on the island, the man with the pigeon, and he launched himself forward. He flew over the heads of the thousands of marine soldiers, disappearing into the depths of the island. The plan, as always, was completely ruined within 5 seconds. Vivi watched him go. In the past, she would have panicked. She would have screamed for him to come back. But now, she just tightened the grip on her weapons. She turned to the chaotic alliance behind her. The Frankie family and the Galley LaForeman were looking for direction. They were fighters, but they weren't soldiers. Vivi stepped up. Her voice cut through the noise of the sirens. She ordered the giants to the front. She organized the shipwrights into a phalanx to protect the rear. She used the King Bulls, Sodom and Gomorrah as battering rams. This is where Vivi shines. She is a tactician. While Luffy is the spear that pierces the heart of the enemy, Vivi is the shield that ensures the army survives. They charge. The battle for Enies' lobby was a meat grinder. 10,000 soldiers stood between them and the Tower of Law. But the Straw Hats were angry. Zoro cut through steel like it was paper. Sanji kicked giants into the sky. And Vivi, riding on the back of a King Bull alongside Sogeking, became the eyes of the battlefield. She spotted snipers in the towers and directed Sogeking to take them out. She saw flanks collapsing and sent the shipwrights to reinforce them. It was a masterclass in leadership. But while the army fought on the ground, Luffy was facing a wall. On the roof of the courthouse, he met Blueno, the bull-like agent of CP9. This fight is crucial. In the original timeline, Luffy realized he needed to evolve. Here, the motivation is even stronger. He failed to protect the Mary. He failed to stop Robin from leaving. He almost lost Vivi to the government assassins in Water 7. He realizes that if he remains as he is, he will lose everything. Luffy plants his feet. He pumps his blood. His skin turns pink. Steam rises from his body. For the first time, he enters Gear 2nd. The fight that follows isn't a fight. It is a massacre. Luffy moves so fast he vanishes. He destroys Blueno's iron defense with a single jet pistol. He doesn't just defeat the agent. He obliterates the concept that CP9 is untouchable. He stands over the fallen agent and screams for Robin. Back on the ground, the crew breaks through. The giants, Oimo and Kashi, switch sides after Sogeking reveals the truth about their captains. The drawbridge is lowered. The path is clear. They rush up the stairs of the courthouse. They reach the roof. And then, silence. Across the giant waterfall, on the balcony of the Tower of Law, stands Spandam. He is flanked by the strongest assassins in the world, the remaining members of CP9. And held between them, bound in sea prism stone, is Nico Robin. But Spandam's eyes widen when he sees the group assembling on the courthouse roof opposite him. He sees the Straw Hat. He sees the Pirate Hunter. But then he sees the blue hair. He sees the princess. Spandam starts laughing. It is a manic, terrified laugh. He holds up a golden transponder snail, the Buster Call. He yells across the void. He mocks them. He tells Robin that she is a fool. But then he turns his venom toward Vivi. He screams that by standing there, Nefertari Vivi has doomed her country. He threatens to use the Buster Call not just on Enies' lobby, but on Alabasta. He says he will strip her father of his crown and turn her desert into a glass wasteland. Vivi trembles. It is the threat she feared most. The wind whips her hair across her face. Beside her, Nami reaches out a hand, but Vivi doesn't take it. She steps forward. She stands at the very edge of the parapet. She looks at Spandam, and then she looks at Robin. Robin is crying. She yells at them to leave. She yells that her burden is too heavy. She screams that she wants to die because everywhere she goes, disaster follows. She looks at Vivi and begs her to go back, to save her kingdom, to not throw it all away for a demon like her. Luffy picks his nose. He looks at Spandam. He asks Sogeking a simple question. Can you shoot that flag? Sogeking doesn't hesitate. He draws his slingshot. The Firebird Star flies across the abyss. It hits the world government flag, the symbol of the union of over 170 nations. the symbol of absolute justice. The flag burns. The Marines watch in horror. Spandam's jaw drops. Pirates fighting Marines is one thing. Burning the flag is a declaration of war against the entire world. Luffy turns to Robin. He ignores the politics. He ignores the army. "I haven't heard you say it yet," he screams, his voice cracking with emotion. "Say you want to live!" Robin looks at the burning flag. She looks at the crew who just declared war on the world for her. She looks at Vivi, a princess who just committed treason to save her. The walls around her heart crumble. Tears pour down her face like rain. "I want to live!" Robin screams, her voice echoing over the roar of the waterfall. "Take me out to the sea with you." Vivi closes her eyes and smiles. A single tear rolls down her cheek. She turns to Spandam. Her face is no longer that of a scared girl. It is the face of a warrior. "You threaten my kingdom?" Vivi shouts, her voice projected by the acoustics of the valley. "Then come and take it. But know this, Spandam. Today, Alabasta stands with the Straw Hats. If you want a war, we will give you a war." It is madness. It is beautiful. The bridge is not down yet. The gap is too wide. The Rocket Man, the unstoppable sea train, launches off the ramp. It flies through the air, crashing into the Tower of Law, bridging the gap for a split second. The crew jumps. They land in the enemy territory. The matchups are set. Luffy goes for Lucci. Zoro takes Kaku. Sanji takes Jabra. Chopper takes Kumadori. Nami takes Khalifa. But there is a variable here. Vivi. She is not a powerhouse monster like the trio, but she is not weak. She lands alongside Nami. She looks at Khalifa, the woman who used to be Iceberg's secretary. The woman who kicked Sanji. "I'll help you," Vivi says to Nami. Nami smiles, spinning her climb attack. "Good, because I have a score to settle with this soap woman." The tower shakes. The fights begin. But deep in the basement, the dark waters are rising and the gates of justice are opening. The Buster Call has been accidentally summoned. 10 battleships are coming to delete this island from the map. The timer has started. The Tower of Law was not just a building. It was a hunting ground. The Straw Hats scattered running through the stone corridors seeking the CP9 agents who held the keys to Robin's handcuffs. But before Vivi and Nami could find their target, they found a tragedy. Sanji. The cook was lying on the floor defeated. He wasn't dead, but he was polished. His body was shiny and smooth like a doll. He had refused to kick a woman even if it meant dying. Nami looked at him with frustration, but Vivi looked at him with respect. She understood that for Sanji, his code was his life. If he broke it, he wouldn't be Sanji anymore. They left him there, promising to finish what he couldn't. They entered the room of bubbles. Khalifa stood there waiting. She adjusted her glasses, looking at the two women with disdain. She called it sexual harassment. She was arrogant. She had eaten the bubble fruit, giving her the power to clean anything, including strength itself. The fight began, and it was immediately apparent that they were outmatched physically. Khalifa moved with the speed of Soru disappearing and reappearing to land heavy kicks. Vivi tried to track her, swinging her peacock slashers to create a defensive perimeter of humming wires. But Khalifa just flowed around them like water. She touched Vivi's arm. Golden hour! Suddenly, Vivi's arm became smooth and slippery. She couldn't grip her weapon. Her arm flopped uselessly at her side. Nami tried to attack with a thunderbolt tempo, but Khalifa cleaned the electricity from the air. It was a nightmare matchup. Khalifa touched them both repeatedly, turning the Navigator and the Princess into shiny, slippery dolls. They couldn't stand. They couldn't hold weapons. Khalifa stood over them, preparing to finish the job. She mocked them. She asked Vivi why a princess would dirty her hands with pirates. She said that royalty should sit on a throne, not crawl in the dust. But Vivi, struggling to push herself up with slippery arms, looked up. She told Khalifa that a throne is just a chair. A queen is defined by the people she protects. And right now, her people were this crew. This is where the tide turned. Nami realized the weakness of the fruit. Water. It washes away the soap. But they were inside a dry room. Nami looked at Vivi. She winked. Nami used her cool ball and heat ball. She didn't aim at Khalifa. She aimed at the ceiling. She created a localized low-pressure system. A miniature storm cloud formed inside the room. "Rain tempo!" Nami shouted. A sudden downpour drenched the room. The soap washed off. Their bodies returned to normal. Vivi didn't waste a second. She grabbed her slashers. She didn't attack Khalifa directly. She attacked the environment. She threw her wires, wrapping them around the furniture, around the pillars, creating a maze of tripping hazards. "Nami now!" Vivi screamed. Khalifa tried to use Geppo to jump into the air, but Vivi yanked the wires, collapsing a bookshelf onto the agent's path. Khalifa stumbled. That 1 second was all Nami needed. She spun her perfect climb attack. Thunderlance tempo! A bolt of lightning traversed the room, piercing through Khalifa's chest. The CP9 agent fell, her dress smoking, her glasses cracking on the floor. The key fell from her pocket. Vivi and Nami collapsed against each other, panting. They had done it. They had defeated an assassin of the government. But the victory was short-lived. A roar shook the foundations of the tower. It wasn't human. It was a guttural sound of pure agony and rage. Vivi looked out the window. Down in the courtyard, Chopper was fighting Kumadori. But Chopper was gone. In his place stood a monster. A towering beast with dead white eyes, destroying everything, friend and foe alike. Vivi covered her mouth. She had seen the Zoan guards in Alabasta, but this was different. This was a friend losing his soul to power. She wanted to run down there to help him, but Frankie arrived. The cyborg blasted the Monster Point chopper into the ocean to save him from himself. It was a brutal mercy. Meanwhile, high above the chaos, the main event was taking place. Luffy stood across from Rob Lucci in the room of crates. This was the pinnacle of the fight. The strongest pirate against the strongest assassin. Lucci was in his hybrid leopard form. He was fast, strong, and ruthless. He viewed Luffy not as a rival, but as a target to be eliminated. He used Shigen, stabbing his fingers into Luffy's rubber body. Even rubber has a limit. Luffy was bleeding. He was panting. Steam poured from his skin as he maintained gear second. But Luffy wasn't fighting for the thrill today. He was fighting for the answer Robin gave him. I want to live. Every time Lucci hit him, Luffy thought of Robin being dragged through the gates of justice. He thought of Vivi crying in Water 7. He refused to fall. Lucci mocked him. He said that having a weak crew was a sin. He said that Vivi was a liability and that eventually Luffy would fail to protect everyone. Luffy's eyes shadowed over. He bit his thumb. He blew air into his bones. His arm inflated to the size of a giant. Gear third. This was the reveal. The bone balloon. Luffy swung a fist the size of a house. Gomu Gomu no Gigant Pistol! He punched Lucci through the wall, through the next wall, through the entire tower. The assassin was sent flying into a battleship out in the bay. The sheer destructive power was terrifying, but it came at a cost. Luffy shriveled up, turning into a tiny version of himself. He was vulnerable. And then the sound came. The sound that signals the end of an island. The golden transponder snail had been pressed earlier by Spandam. Now the response arrived. On the horizon, 10 massive battleships appeared. They bore the mark of the world government. The Buster Call. The fleet that destroys everything indiscriminately. They began to fire. Cannonballs the size of cars rained down on Enies' lobby. The bridge of hesitation where Spandam was dragging Robin was shattering. Vivi and Nami were running through the hallway when the first shell hit the tower. The ceiling collapsed, separating them. Vivi was thrown backward into a stairwell. She was alone again. Dust filled the air. She coughed, standing up. She checked her pocket. She had Khalifa's key. She needed to get to the bridge, but the path was blocked by fire. She looked out a broken window. The island was burning. It was Ohara all over again. But Luffy was still fighting. Lucci had returned from the battleship, injured but furious. The final round was about to begin. If Luffy didn't win in the next minute, they would all die in the fire. The bridge of hesitation was crumbling. The Buster Call battleships were relentless, turning the island of justice into a hellscape of fire and ruin. Luffy was at his limit. Gear second had burned through his stamina. He was panting, blood dripping from his chin. Rob Lucci stood over him, battered but still standing, the ultimate predator. Lucci delivered his final judgment, Roku Ogen, a shockwave blast at point-blank range. Luffy's internal organs took the hit. He collapsed. His eyes went white. For a moment, the war was lost. Soga King, saw this from the bridge. He pulled off his mask. He screamed. He didn't scream for help. He screamed insults. He told Luffy to stop acting like he was dying. He told him that they didn't come all this way to see him lose. He challenged Lucci himself, shaking with fear, just to buy his captain 1 second. Luffy heard him. He heard the voice of the friend he had fought in Water 7. He remembered the promise. I will become the Pirate King. He planted his feet. He forced his blood to pump one last time. He screamed, a sound that tore through his throat. Jet! Gatling! It wasn't just a flurry of punches. It was a wall of fists. Hundreds of blows per second, moving so fast they were invisible. Lucci tried to use Tekai, his iron body defense. But you cannot defend against pure willpower. Luffy punched through the iron. He punched through the assassin. He punched him until he smashed him through the stone wall of the tower. Lucci fell. The strongest agent of the world government was defeated. Luffy collapsed, unable to move a finger. But the danger wasn't over. The battleships turned their guns on the bridge. The rest of the crew, Zoro, Sanji, Nami, Chopper, Frankie, and Vivi, were pinned down. They had Robin, they had the keys, but they had nowhere to run. The bridge was surrounded. Vivi felt a moment of despair. How could they escape this? They had no ship. The Mary was gone. The Frankie family's ships were destroyed. They were trapped on an island that was being erased from the map. But then she heard it. Not a voice, a melody. A strange, impossible sound coming from the turbulent ocean below the whirlpools. It was the sound of a hammer fixing wood. Klabouterman. Vivi looked down at the raging sea, and she saw it. A miracle. A small battered ship riding the currents sailing against the wind alone. The Going Mary. It had come. It had repaired itself one last time for one last voyage. Vivi grabbed her transponder snail. She screamed to the crew. She told them to look at the sea. She told them they had a way out. Jump! Vivi screamed. Jump into the sea. The others looked down. They saw only swirling whirlpools. They thought she had gone mad with fear, but then they heard it. The voice of the ship. Let's go home, everyone. Zoro smiled. Sanji lit a cigarette. They grabbed Luffy's limp body, and they jumped. Mary! Usopp screamed, tears streaming down his face. The escape was a miracle. The battleships couldn't target the small ship amidst the whirlpools. Sanji used his brain, closing the gates of justice to create eddies that confused the giant Navy ships. The Straw Hats sailed away, leaving the burning island of Enies Lobby behind them. They had declared war on the world, they had destroyed a government stronghold, and they had survived. But the miracle had a time limit. As they sailed back toward Water 7, the sky cleared. The snow began to fall. Light, gentle snow. But then, a loud crack echoed through the ocean. The Going Mary split in half. The front of the ship broke away. The main mast collapsed. The crew froze. Luffy panicked. He ran around asking for wood, asking for nails. He begged Iceberg, who had sailed out to meet them on his galley, to fix her. Iceberg looked at the rubber boy. He looked at the ship. He shook his head slowly. She has slept, Iceberg said softly. She brought you this far. She gave you everything she had, but she cannot sail anymore. Luffy stopped. He looked at the Mary. He remembered the journey, leaving Syrup Village, flying to the Sky Island, falling to the Blue Sea, the fight with Usopp. The Mary had seen it all. Vivi stood next to Nami and Robin. She felt the weight of this moment. They prepared a small boat. They placed the Mary in the water. It was a Viking funeral. Luffy held a torch. His hand was shaking. Mary, Luffy said, his voice trembling. The bottom of the ocean is dark and lonely. We'll watch you until the end. He set the ship on fire. The flames caught the dry wood. The snow fell around them, melting as it touched the heat. And then, the voice returned. One last time. Not in their heads, but in the air. I'm sorry. Usopp broke down sobbing. Nami buried her face in Vivi's shoulder. Zoro drank from his flask, hiding his eyes. I wanted to carry you further. I wanted to go on more adventures with you. But I was happy. Vivi wiped her tears. She looked at the burning ship. She realized that this crew was stronger than any army, stronger than any government. Because they loved. They loved a ship enough to give it a soul. Thank you for loving me. The Going Mary burned until she was nothing but ash and memories. The sea swallowed the remains. Silence fell over the galley-lost ship. The war was over. They had won, but they had lost. They were battered, bruised, and shipless. But they were together. The battle was over, but the shockwaves were just beginning. The crew returned to Water 7 not as fugitives, but as heroes, at least to the citizens who knew the truth. They rested at the Galley Law headquarters, healing their wounds and sleeping for 2 days straight. When Luffy finally woke up, he didn't wake up to breakfast. He woke up to a marine invasion. A wall was broken down, and a fist of love sent the rubber captain flying. Monkey D. Garp, the hero of the Marines, had arrived. The revelation that followed dropped everyone's jaw. Garp was Luffy's grandfather, and the revolutionary dragon was his father. Vivi listened to this family tree with a mix of horror and awe. It explained so much about Luffy's chaotic nature. But Garp wasn't there to arrest them. He was there to check on his grandson. He brought 2 familiar faces, Kobe and Helmeppo. The reunion was brief but poignant. Luffy saw how much Kobe had grown, mastering Soru. It was a reminder that while the Straw Hats were getting stronger, their rivals were too. Then came the celebration, the legendary Straw Hat Party. The food was endless. The booze flowed like water. Vivi sat by the pool watching the chaos. Nami was relaxing in a bikini, charging people to take photos, her greed untouched by the trauma of war. Zoro and Sanji were fighting. Chopper was drunk on soda. It was peaceful. But in the shadows of the party, a cold wind blew. Aokiji was there, leaning against a pillar. He wasn't there to fight. He was there to talk to Robin. He asked her if she had found her answer. Robin smiled, looking at Luffy laughing with Usopp. "I have," she said. Aokiji tipped his sleeping mask. He admitted defeat. He let her go, finally lifting the shadow of Ohara. The peace was broken by the news coup. The new bounties had arrived. Luffy, 300 million berries. Zoro, 120 million berries. Robin, 80 million berries. Sanji, with a terrible drawn picture, 77 million berries. Sogeking, 30 million berries. Nami, 16 million berries. Chopper, 50 berries. Pet, Frankie, 44 million berries. And then, the final poster. Nefertari Vivi, 50 million berries. The picture was her standing on the Tower of Law, wind in her hair, defying the world. Vivi held the poster. Her hands trembled, but then she smiled. It was official. There was no going back to Alabasta now. She was a wanted woman. Frankie arrived with the final surprise. The Dream Ship. Built from the atom wood bought with their stolen money. The Thousand Sunny. A ship that could sail 1,000 seas like the sun. But they needed a shipwright. Luffy asked Frankie to join. Frankie refused, acting tough. But Robin used her persuasive grip on his family jewels. With some tears and a push from his family, Frankie agreed. The crew was ready to leave. But one person was missing, Usopp. He was on the shore, practicing his lines, waiting for them to beg him to come back. But the ship started moving. They weren't waiting. Usopp panicked. He ran after the ship. He screamed excuses. But they didn't stop. Finally, he broke. He screamed the truth. "I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please take me back." Luffy stretched his arm. He grabbed his sniper. He pulled him aboard. The crew was whole again. 8 members, plus a ship, plus a princess. As the Thousand Sunny flew out of Water 7, riding the coup de burst, Vivi looked back at the receding island. She touched the bounty poster in her pocket. She looked at her eternal pose. The next destination wasn't just another island. It was the Florian Triangle. It was Fishman Island. It was the New World. Have you ever wondered what truly scares a woman who stared down a warlord and commanded an army? You might think Nefertari Vivi is fearless. After all, she stood before Crocodile and screamed for peace while a bomb ticked away. But there is a difference between facing a man and facing a monster. When the Straw Hats enter the Sea of Ghosts, Vivi learns that courage is not just about fighting for your country. It is about fighting for your own soul. This is the story of how a desert queen walked into a nightmare and discovered that some shadows bite back. The Thousand Sunny sailed through a sea of white. The mist was so thick you could barely see the figurehead of the lion. It had been days since they saw the sun. The air was damp and cold, chilling Vivi to the bone. She stood on the grassy deck of the new ship, hugging her arms. She missed the Mary, but this ship was a fortress. It felt safe. Or at least it should have. Nami was in the library looking at maps but finding nothing. The Florian Triangle was a graveyard of ships. A place where vessels disappeared without a trace. Usopp and Chopper were clinging to each other on the deck, jumping at every creak of the wood. Vivi tried to maintain her composure. She was a royal. She had to be the calm center. But deep down, the silence of this ocean unsettled her more than the chaos of war. Then they heard it. A song drifting through the fog. A low, mournful humming. A massive ship emerged from the mist. It was a ruin. Tattered sails, broken masts. And standing on the deck was a skeleton with an afro holding a teacup. The crew's reaction was immediate chaos. Luffy's eyes sparkled. He wanted to go see it. Nami screamed. Usopp prayed. Vivi stared. In Alabasta, she had seen strange devil fruit powers. She had seen men turn into falcons and fires. But a talking skeleton was something out of a fairy tale. A dark fairy tale. Luffy, Sanji, and Nami boarded the ghost ship. Vivi went with them, driven by a mix of fear and duty to watch her captain. When they met Brook, the skeleton gentleman, the horror turned into comedy. He asked to see Nami's panties. Nami kicked him. He asked to see Vivi's. Vivi didn't kick him. She was too stunned. She simply stared at the empty sockets of his eyes and felt a profound sadness. This man was dead, yet he was laughing. But the comedy ended when the island appeared. Thriller Bark. It wasn't an island. It was a massive ship roaming the sea, catching victims like a predator's mouth. The Sunny was trapped in the giant spiderweb gate. The chains locked behind them. They were prisoners. The crew split up. This is the first major divergence in the timeline. In the original story, Nami, Usopp, and Chopper took the Mini Mary to explore, leaving the strong fighters behind. This time, Vivi refuses to let Nami go alone. She joins the exploration team. The weakling trio becomes the cautious quartet. They navigated the canal surrounded by dead trees and ruins. The atmosphere was oppressive. Vivi gripped her peacock slashers. She felt eyes watching them from the shadows. They docked at the shore of the island. It looked like a gothic cemetery. Nami didn't want to get off the boat. Usopp was already crying. But Vivi stepped onto the land. She told them that staying on the boat made them sitting ducks. If there were enemies, they needed to find cover. As they walked through the dead forest, a three-headed dog, the Cerberus, leaped from the shadows. Usopp screamed. Chopper transformed. But Vivi acted fast. She used her perfume charm, shattering a vial of scent. The dog sneezed, confused by the smell, giving them time to run. They scrambled up a tree. They met Hildon the Batman, who offered to take them to the mansion. Vivi was suspicious. Her political instincts screamed that this was a trap. A carriage ride in the middle of a haunted forest? It was too convenient. But they had no choice. They got in. The carriage ride was a descent into madness. The forest was filled with creatures that defied logic. Zombies rising from the ground. Trees that drank alcohol. Vivi sat next to Nami, holding her hand. Nami was trembling. Vivi whispered that it would be okay, but she didn't believe it herself. They arrived at the mansion. It was a castle of horrors. And then they were abandoned. The carriage dumped them in the middle of a graveyard. This is where the real terror began. Zombies began to rise from the earth. Not just one or two. Dozens. They were rotting, stitched together, groaning for flesh. Nami screamed. Usopp fired his slingshot, but the zombies didn't feel pain. They just kept coming. Vivi stepped in front of Nami. She spun her wires. Peacock string slasher! The wires cut through the rotten flesh, severing limbs. But the limbs kept moving. A severed hand crawled toward Vivi's ankle. She gasped, kicking it away. This wasn't a battle she could win with skill. You cannot kill what is already dead. They ran. They burst into the mansion, slamming the heavy wooden doors behind them. They were safe from the zombies outside, but they had locked themselves in with the monsters inside. The mansion was cold. The air smelled of formaldehyde and old dust. They explored the hallways, creeping past moving paintings and taxidermy heads that whispered insults. Vivi felt a presence. A heavy, lustful gaze that made her skin crawl. Nami felt it too. She was taking a shower later, trying to wash off the filth of the graveyard. Vivi was guarding the door. Suddenly, Nami screamed. Vivi burst into the bathroom, weapons drawn. Nami was pinned against the wall by nothing, an invisible force. Vivi saw the water splashing against an unseen shape. A man. Absalom. Vivi didn't hesitate. She slashed at the air. Her wire caught something. A grunt of pain echoed from the empty space. Absalom released Nami, surprised by the attack. He hadn't expected a second woman to be so aggressive. Show yourself, coward! Vivi shouted, covering Nami with a towel. A voice laughed from the thin air. It was a lecherous, deep laugh. Absalom boasted that he had found a bride. He said Nami would be his queen of the graveyard. Vivi stood her ground. She told him that Nami was a navigator of the sea, not a trophy for a ghost. She swung her weapon again, using the water droplets in the air to track his movement. But Absalom was strong. He backhanded Vivi with an invisible fist, sending her crashing into the sink. Nami screamed Vivi's name. She used her thunderbolt tempo, shocking the wet room. Absalom cursed and retreated, vowing to return for his bride. Vivi groaned, pulling herself up. Her cheek was bruising. Nami hugged her, crying. They were terrified. They were being hunted by things they couldn't see and things they couldn't kill. They continued deeper into the mansion, trying to find a way out. They entered a room filled with stuffed toys and cute furniture. It felt out of place. And then she appeared. A girl floating in the air, holding a parasol, laughing with a horo 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 sound. Perona, the ghost princess. The ghost flew through the crew. It was a massacre of morale. Chopper fell to his knees, apologizing to the women of the world for existing. Vivi dropped her weapons, tears streaming down her face. I am a failure of a princess. I abandoned my kingdom. Perona laughed. Horo horo horo, everyone bows before me. But one man remained standing. His legs were shaking, but he didn't fall. Usopp. Perona stopped laughing. Her eyes bulged. Why aren't you depressed? I hit you with 4 ghosts. Usopp looked at her, trembling. You can't make me negative, because I'm already negative. It was a shock. Perona fell to her knees in disbelief. What kind of miserable life do you lead? Usopp raised his slingshot. I am the brave warrior of the sea. Prepare yourself. Vivi, still on the floor, looked up with blurry eyes. She saw Usopp standing tall. For a moment, hope flickered. But Perona wasn't a warlord's lieutenant for nothing. She realized her ghosts were useless against him, so she changed tactics. She snapped her fingers. Kumasi, crush him! The giant stuffed bear zombie, which had been silent behind Usopp, roared. Usopp turned around screaming. He wasn't strong enough to fight a giant zombie in close combat. Kumasi swiped a massive paw, knocking Usopp into the wall. He slumped to the ground, unconscious. Take them away, Perona ordered, dusting off her dress, clearly shaken by the encounter with Usopp. The master needs fresh shadows. The zombies swarmed them. Vivi tried to reach for her weapon, but her will was broken. Darkness consumed them. I am a failure, Vivi whispered, tears streaming down her face. I abandoned my father. I abandoned my country to play pirate. I am a selfish traitor who deserves to rot in this darkness. Nami watched helpless as her strongest emotional support collapsed under the weight of her own guilt. They were trapped. Their will was broken. And from the shadows, the sounds of heavy footsteps approached. The zombies were coming to collect them. The room spun. The negative thoughts swirled in Vivi's mind like a sandstorm choking her hope. She was on her knees, paralyzed by guilt, while Perona floated above her, laughing. The Ghost Princess ordered her zombies to capture the intruders. Kumasi, the giant stuffed bear, lumbered forward and scooped up Nami, Usopp, and the despondent Chopper. Vivi was grabbed by a group of squirrel zombies. They were dragged deeper into the darkness of the mansion. They were brought to a grand hall. At the far end sat a giant of a man, or rather, a demon. Gecko Moria. He was massive, his shadow dancing behind him with a life of its own. He looked at the captured Straw Hats with a grin that split his face. He didn't care about their bounties. He wanted their shadows. Vivi watched helplessly as Moria used his scissors. Snip. He cut Nami's shadow from her feet, then Usopp's, then Chopper's. The pain was excruciating, a feeling of having your soul ripped from your body. Nami screamed and fell unconscious. Usopp fainted. Then Moria turned to Vivi. He leaned in close. He said he smelled royalty. A shadow with the spirit of a ruler would make a powerful zombie. He grabbed Vivi's shadow. Vivi tried to fight to grab it back, but she was too weak from the negativity. The scissors snapped. Her shadow was gone. Throw them back on the ship, Moria ordered casually. Let them wake up in the sun and burn. But they didn't wake up on the ship. The zombies, being lazy, dumped them in the forest. Vivi was the first to wake up. It was still night, thankfully. She felt light. Wrong. She looked at the ground. No shadow. The horror of what happened hit her. If the sun touched her, she would disintegrate. She shook Nami and Usopp awake. They were terrified. They had to find Luffy. They had to get their shadows back. But first, they had to see where their shadows went. They snuck back toward the graveyard. There, Moria was performing his ceremony. He was inserting the stolen shadows into corpses. Vivi watched from behind a tombstone, her breath hitching. She saw a zombie rise. It was wearing a tattered version of a royal dress. It held a rusty sword. The zombie opened its eyes. It looked around confused. Then it spoke. I must stop the fighting. Please, stop fighting. Vivi covered her mouth to stifle a scream. That was her shadow. That was her voice. But it was twisted. The zombie, designated number 404, was clumsy but determined. It started yelling at the other zombies to lay down their weapons and negotiate peace. It was a grotesque parody of Vivi's leadership. Suddenly, a roar shook the island. The ground cracked. Oars! The giant ancient demon had been awakened with Luffy's shadow. He began to rampage. Amidst the chaos, the monster trio arrived. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji stormed the mansion. They were furious. They found the cautious quartet in the forest. When Sanji saw Nami and Vivi without shadows, he erupted in flames of rage. He vowed to kick Moria into the next ocean. But they had a problem. Perona was blocking the path to the tower, and Usopp, usually the coward, stepped up. He told the others to go ahead. He would handle the Ghost Princess. He was already negative, so her ghost couldn't hurt him. That left Vivi and Nami with a new mission. Find the treasure room? No. Find Absalom. Sanji had run off to find the invisible man who tried to marry Nami. Vivi looked at Nami. We aren't letting Sanji handle this alone, Vivi said. Her voice was shaky but firm. That monster touched you. We end him. They ran through the crumbling halls. They found the wedding chapel. Absalom was there trying to force a zombie lord to marry him? No, he was trying to marry an unconscious Nami. Wait, Nami was with Vivi. The confusion of the scene was high, but Absalom spotted the real Nami entering the room. "My bride!" Absalom shouted, turning invisible. Sanji burst through the wall, kicking debris everywhere. He was furious, but he was taking hits he couldn't see. Vivi realized she couldn't see Absalom, but she could hear him. She closed her eyes. She thought back to the training with Zoro on the ship. Listened to the breath. Listened to the intent. She heard a footstep to her left. She threw her peacock slasher. The wire wrapped around something invisible. "Sanji, left!" Vivi screamed, yanking the wire. Absalom stumbled, becoming partially visible as the wire tightened. Sanji didn't waste the opening. "Diable Jambe!" His leg ignited. He spun in the air. "Premier Hache!" He delivered a barrage of kicks that reshaped Absalom's face. The invisible man went flying into a pillar, knocked out cold. Sanji landed, straightening his tie. He looked at Vivi. "Nice assist, Vivi-chan." Vivi smiled weakly, but the ground shook again. Oars was coming. The giant zombie was climbing the tower. He was looking for the crew, and inside him was Luffy's personality. "Meet!" Oars roared, punching a tower and sending it crashing down. The entire crew gathered in the courtyard. They were tiny compared to the giant. Zoro, Sanji, Frankie, Robin, Chopper, Nami, Usopp, and Vivi. They stood in a line. This was the first time they were all fighting a single enemy together. A raid boss. Vivi looked up at the giant. He moved like Luffy. He stretched like Luffy. It seemed impossible. Frankie had a plan. "Tactics 15!" he shouted. The crew started to dock. Frankie grabbed Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, and Chopper, forming a human robot. He called for Robin to be the left arm. Robin refused. It is embarrassing as a human being. Vivi, however, looked at the giant fist descending toward them. She didn't care about embarrassment. She jumped onto Frankie's shoulder. "I'll do it!" she yelled. "Vivi-chan is the left arm! Super!" Frankie shouted. But Oars didn't wait for them to dock. He smashed the formation. The crew scattered. The fight became a desperate struggle for survival. Zoro cut the giant's stone abs. Sanji kicked his massive jaw. But Oars just laughed. He was unstoppable. Vivi realized they couldn't beat him with power. They needed to trip him up. Literally. "Robin! Nami!" Vivi shouted into her Den Mushi. "We need to freeze his feet! Frankie, build a bridge!" The plan was chaotic. Frankie built stairs instantly. Brook, who had joined the fray, ran up with the crew. They needed to straighten Oar's spine so Luffy could smash him. But where was Luffy? He had disappeared into the forest. Suddenly, a blue nightmare emerged from the trees. Nightmare Luffy. He had absorbed 100 shadows. He was massive, blue, and carrying a giant sword. He stopped Oar's punch with one hand. Vivi watched in awe. This wasn't just her captain. This was a god of war. Nightmare Luffy beat Oar senseless, spinning him around and throwing him. But the shadows left Luffy's body. He collapsed. Oar stood up again. He wasn't done. The sun was beginning to rise. The sky was turning gray. If the sun hit them, Vivi, Nami, Zoro, Sanji, and Luffy would all vanish. "Moria!" Luffy screamed, waking up. He activated Gear 2nd and Gear 3rd at the same time. "Gigant Jet Shell!" He launched himself at Moria, who had absorbed 1,000 shadows and become a giant blob of darkness. The impact was cataclysmic. Moria vomited the shadows. They flew into the sky, returning to their owners. Vivi felt something slam into her back. Her shadow. She looked down. It was there. The sun crested the horizon, bathing them in light. They didn't burn. They were safe. But the relief lasted exactly 10 seconds. Another presence appeared on the island. A man holding a Bible. Bartholomew Kuma, a warlord of the sea. The government had sent him to ensure no witnesses remained. He looked at the battered crew. He looked at Vivi. "Nefertari Vivi," Kuma said, his voice robotic. "The world government has a special interest in your termination." Vivi froze. They were exhausted. Zoro could barely stand. Sanji was unconscious. Luffy was out cold. They couldn't fight another warlord. Kuma raised his hand. He compressed the air into a paw-shaped bomb. Ursa shock. The blast leveled the courtyard. Vivi was thrown into a pile of rubble. Her ears rang. She couldn't move. She looked up through blurry eyes. She saw Zoro standing up. He was walking toward Kuma. He was offering his head. He was bargaining for Luffy's life. Vivi tried to scream to tell him to stop, but no sound came out. She watched as Kuma extracted all of Luffy's pain, a giant red bubble. She watched Zoro walk into it. Then everything went black. Silence returned to Thriller Bark. The mist still clung to the graveyard, but the terror was gone, replaced by the warm light of the morning sun. Vivi woke up coughing. Dust and debris covered her. She pushed a piece of masonry off her legs and sat up. Her body ached in places she didn't know existed. She looked around. The courtyard was a crater. The crew was slowly waking up. Luffy was laughing, running around demanding meat, seemingly completely healed. He had no idea what had happened. He thought he had just slept really well. The joyous sounds of the rolling pirates and Lola's crew celebrating their return shadows filled the air. It felt like a victory. But Vivi noticed something wrong. Sanji was frantically looking for someone. Vivi followed his gaze. Standing amidst the rubble, leaning against a broken pillar, was Zoro. His arms were crossed. His clothes were torn to shreds. Blood pooled around his feet like a crimson lake. Vivi gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. She ran toward him, stumbling over the broken stones. Sanji got there first. He grabbed Zoro's shoulder, shaking him. Zoro didn't fall. He stood like a statue of iron. "What happened here?" Sanji yelled, his voice cracking. "Where did all this blood come from?" Zoro opened one eye. It was bloodshot, filled with an exhaustion that went beyond physical limits. He looked at Sanji. He looked at Vivi, who had arrived trembling at the sight of his wounds. "Nothing," Zoro rasped, his voice barely a whisper. "Nothing happened." Vivi stared at him. Tears welled in her eyes. She knew Kuma had been there. She remembered the warlord. She realized instantly that Zoro had taken something, a burden that was meant for their captain. She looked at Luffy, who was blissfully eating a ham bone in the distance. The weight of Zoro's loyalty crushed her heart. This wasn't just a crewmate. This was a samurai who would die before letting his captain's dream end. Later that day, the banquet began. It was a strange mix of horror and joy. They were partying on a ghost ship. Brook sat at the piano. He began to play. The melody was melancholic at first, then lively. Binks' sake. Vivi sat on a barrel, sipping a drink. She watched Brook. She learned his story. 50 years of solitude. 50 years of drifting in the fog, guarding the souls of his dead crewmates. It made her own struggles seem different. Not smaller, but shared. Pain was a universal language on this sea. Luffy asked Brook to join the crew. Brook accepted. He was crying, though he had no eyes. He had a dream to fulfill. Laboon was waiting. Vivi smiled. Another weirdo. Another family member. A skeleton musician. It fit perfectly. As the party wound down, Lola approached Nami and Vivi. She gave Nami a vivre card, a piece of paper that pointed to her mother in the New World. Vivi watched the exchange. She thought about her own father. Did he have a vivre card? Was it burning? The guilt of leaving Alabasta never truly left her, but moments like this, surrounded by laughter and music, made the burden lighter. But the piece was interrupted by a sober realization. Kuma had spared them, but he had left a message. The New World was not like paradise. They were barely surviving. They needed to get stronger. They prepared to leave Thriller Bark. They loaded the Sunny with supplies. Perona had vanished, blasted away by Kuma earlier. Moria was gone. As the Thousand Sunnies sailed out of the Florian Triangle, the mist finally cleared. The sun shone bright and hot. Vivi stood on the deck, feeling the warmth on her skin. She looked at her shadow stretching long on the grass deck. It was there. It was hers. Luffy jumped onto the figurehead. Next stop, Fishman Island. But to get to Fishman Island, they had to go to the Red Line, to the Sabaody archipelago. Vivi looked at the map. Sabaody. It was right next to Mary Joyce, the Holy Land, the home of the Celestial Dragons, the place where the world government sat on their throne. A chill ran down her spine that had nothing to do with ghosts. Going to Sabaody meant getting close to the center of the world. And for a fugitive princess with a 50 million berry bounty, that was the most dangerous place on Earth. Zoro walked by, now bandaged like a mummy. He leaned on the railing next to her. "Scared?" he grunted. Vivi looked at him. She thought of the blood pool. She thought of Enies' lobby. Terrified, Vivi admitted. Then she smiled, a sharp pirate smile. "But I'm not turning back." Zoro smirked. "Good." The ship sailed forward. The Red Line loomed on the horizon, a massive wall of red rock separating the seas. The first half of the Grand Line was over. The beginning of the end was starting. There is a line that divides the world. To most pirates, the red line is just a mountain that separates the blues from the New World. It is a hurdle to be crossed. But to Nefertari Vivi, standing on the deck of the Thousand Sunny looking up at the massive red cliffs, the red line is not just a mountain, it is a throne. At the very top of those cliffs sits Mary Joas, the Holy Land. It is the home of the world nobles, the celestial dragons, the people her ancestors refused to join 800 years ago. By sailing here, Vivi is not just a pirate. She is a runaway child returning to the doorstep of the family she rejected. The Thousand Sunny bobbed in the water at the base of the massive continent. The crew was excited. Luffy was hanging off the figurehead screaming about the new world. Brook was drinking tea, marveling at the size of the mountain. But Vivi stood near the helm, gripping the railing until her knuckles turned white. Robin noticed. She always noticed. She walked up to the princess and stood silently beside her. She didn't say a word, but her presence was a comfort. Vivi whispered that they were too close. They were right under the nose of the world government. With a bounty of 50 million berries, Vivi was no longer a diplomat. She was a target. But before they could worry about the government, they had to deal with the locals. A group of masked riders on flying fish attacked the ship, the Flying Fish Riders. It was a chaotic skirmish. Vivi fought alongside Nami using her peacock slashers to cut the wires of the riders. It was here that she realized how much the crew had grown. Zoro and Sanji swatted the enemies away like flies. Luffy didn't even break a sweat. Then came the reveal of Duval, the man with the iron mask who hated Sanji. When the mask came off, revealing a face that looked exactly like Sanji's terrible wanted poster, the entire crew burst into laughter. Even Vivi couldn't help it. The tension of the red line evaporated in the face of the sheer absurdity of the Straw Hat life. Sanji kicked Duval's face, rearranging his bones into something handsome, and suddenly they had allies. It was the Straw Hat magic. They turned enemies into friends just by being themselves. With the help of the Flying Fish Riders, they searched for a way to get to Fishman Island. They met Cammy the mermaid and Papag the starfish. They learned that to get to the ocean floor, they needed to coat the ship in resin. And the only place to do that was the Sabaody archipelago. Vivi froze when she heard the name, Sabaody. She knew it well from her history lessons in the palace. It was a lawless zone right next to the Holy Land. It was a place where the Navy turned a blind eye to nightmares because it served the pleasures of the nobles. She grabbed Luffy's arm. She told him with intense seriousness that they had to be careful. She told him that this island was not like the others. There were people there who could call an admiral with the press of a button. Luffy nodded, but Vivi could see the glazed look in his eyes. He didn't understand politics. He only understood freedom. They arrived at the archipelago. It was beautiful. Massive mangrove trees grew out of the ocean and giant bubbles floated in the air, reflecting the sunlight in rainbows. It looked like an amusement park. The crew was mesmerized. They docked the Sunny in a hidden grove. Vivi gathered everyone on the deck before they disembarked. She looked at the crew, especially Luffy and Zoro. She told them the one rule of Sabaody, the rule that kept the peace in this chaotic place. If they saw a person wearing a bubble helmet on their head, they were not to look at them. They were not to speak to them. And under no circumstances were they to touch them. Those were the celestial dragons. Luffy asked why. He asked if they were strong. Vivi shook her head. She said they were weak. But if you hit one, an admiral of the Navy would come to destroy the entire island. She explained that these people considered themselves gods and everyone else was trash. The crew split up to find the coding mechanic. Vivi went with Luffy, Chopper, Brook, and Cammy. She refused to let Luffy out of her sight. They explored the groves. They rode the Bonchari bikes inside the bubbles. For a moment, it felt like a vacation. They ate ice cream and laughed at the strange architecture. But the darkness of Sabaody is never far away. As they walked through the town, the crowd suddenly parted. People dropped to their knees, trembling with fear. The silence was heavy and suffocating. A man walked down the center of the street. He wore a thick white suit and a glass bubble over his head. He held a pistol in one hand and a chain in the other. At the end of the chain, crawling on his hands and knees, was a pirate with a collar around his neck, a slave. Vivi grabbed Luffy's hand and pulled him down behind a crate. She forced him to hide. She peered over the edge. She saw the celestial dragon kick the slave because he was crawling too slow. She saw the apathy in the noble's eyes. It made her sick. In Alabasta, a king bowed to his people to save them. Here, these so-called gods treated humans like cattle. The slave cried out for mercy. He said he had a family. The celestial dragon pulled the trigger. Bang! The slave fell silent. The noble complained that his ride was broken and asked his guards to find him a new one. Vivi felt Luffy's muscles tense. He was going to jump. He was going to punch him. Vivi squeezed his hand with all her strength. She whispered to him, begging him to stop. She told him that if he moved now, he would doom them all. She told him to think of Nami, think of Robin, think of the Mary. Luffy looked at Vivi. He saw the terror in her eyes. He saw the tears threatening to spill. He gritted his teeth and looked away. It was one of the hardest things he ever had to do. They stayed hidden until the procession passed. But fate is cruel on Sabaody. They eventually found Shaki's ripoff bar and met Rayleigh the Dark King. Vivi was stunned. The first mate of Gold Roger was alive and coating ships. It felt like they were in the presence of a legend. Rayleigh agreed to coat their ship, but it would take 3 days. 3 days of hiding. And then disaster struck. Camie was kidnapped. The mermaid had been taken by kidnappers to be sold at the human auction house. The crew scrambled. They rode the flying fish, racing against time. Vivi rode behind Luffy, holding onto his waist. Her heart was pounding. This was exactly what she feared. The collision of the innocent Straw Hats with the corrupt system of the world. They arrived at the auction house. It was a grand theater of cruelty. Wealthy people sat in rows bidding on giants, fishmen, and humans as if they were furniture. Vivi felt nauseous. This was the dark underbelly of the world government that her ancestors had rejected. They found Camie in a fish tank on the stage. But they couldn't just take her. The auction had started. Nami tried to use logic. She checked their treasure. They had millions of berries. They could buy her back. It was disgusting to participate in the system, but it was the safest way. Vivi stood by Nami ready to negotiate. They prepared to bid. Then the doors opened. A celestial dragon walked in. St. Charles, the same man from the street. He sniffed the air looking bored. He saw Camie. He didn't bid. He just stated a number. 500 million berries. The room went silent. No one could beat that. Nami dropped her sign. They didn't have enough. The system was rigged. The law was money, and the nobles had all of it. Vivi looked at the stage. She looked at Camie crying in the tank. She looked at the celestial dragon gloating. She realized that diplomacy had failed. Money had failed. The rules of this world were built to crush good people. And then a crash echoed from the back. Luffy burst in riding a flying fish, crashing into the auction house. He saw Camie. He started running toward the stage. Hachi, the octopus fishman, tried to stop him, revealing his multiple arms. The crowd screamed. A fishman on land was a monster to them. St. Charles stood up. He pulled his pistol. He didn't hesitate. He shot Hachi. The sound of the gunshot rang in Vivi's ears. Hachi fell bleeding. The celestial dragon laughed, jumping up and down, celebrating his catch. He bragged about getting a free octopus slave. Luffy stopped running. He stopped smiling. He started walking toward the stairs. Vivi knew what was coming. Every instinct in her royal upbringing told her to stop him, to scream, to throw a wire and hold him back. An admiral would come. The buster call would come. It was suicide. But Vivi looked at Hachi bleeding on the floor. She looked at the twisted face of the celestial dragon. And she remembered Crocodile. She remembered Spandam. She remembered that some evils cannot be negotiated with. Vivi didn't move to stop him. She stood beside Nami and watched. Luffy walked up the stairs. He didn't say a word. St. Charles fired his gun at Luffy. The bullets bent around his rubber body. Luffy pulled his arm back. The punch was not just a hit. It was a judgment. Luffy punched the celestial dragon in the face so hard it smashed his helmet, sent him flying across the room, and embedded him into the stone wall. The color drained from the world. The taboo was broken. The god had been struck. Vivi let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She reached for her weapon. Diplomacy was over. The war had begun. The punch echoed around the world. St. Charles lay unconscious, his head embedded in the wall. The auction house erupted into panic. The nobles scrambled over each other like rats trying to escape a sinking ship. Luffy stood on the stage, his chest heaving. He looked at Hachi, apologizing for not being faster. Vivi stood amidst the chaos. The fear of the admiral was replaced by the clarity of combat. She knew what was coming. She signaled to Nami and Chopper. They rushed to the stage to free Camie, but the guards weren't going to let them leave. The auction house staff attacked. It was a brawl. Then, the back wall exploded. The Dark King Rayleigh stepped out. He used a burst of haki, knocking out every guard and weak-willed person in the room. Vivi felt the pressure, a wave of dizziness, but she grit her teeth and stayed standing. This was the power of a legend. Rayleigh helped them remove Camie's collar. He told them to run. The Marines were already surrounding the building. The three captains, Luffy, Law, and Kid, stepped outside to clear the path. Vivi watched them. It was a terrifying display of power. But as they ran back to Shaki's bar, the real nightmare began. An admiral had landed, Kizaru, the light human. He arrived on a cannonball, casual and deadly. He started kicking supernovas through buildings at the speed of light. The Straw Hats tried to escape, but they were intercepted by a pacifista, a cyborg that looked exactly like Kuma. The battle against the pacifista was brutal. The monster trio exhausted themselves just to take one down. Vivi fought from the back, using her wires to trip the giant cyborg, but her attacks bounced off its metal skin. It was hopelessness all over again. They were too weak. And then Kizaru arrived. He floated down, blocking their path. He raised his foot, charging a laser to execute Zoro. It's over, Vivi thought, her hand trembling on her weapon. Rayleigh intervened, kicking Kizaru's leg away. But even the Dark King couldn't save everyone. More pacifistas arrived. Sentomaru arrived with his massive axe. The crew was surrounded. Luffy made the call. The hardest call a captain can make. Everyone run! We can't win this! The crew scattered. Vivi ran with Nami and Frankie. But then he appeared. The real Bartholomew Kuma, the tyrant. He held his Bible. He wasn't there to kill, he was there to erase. He vanished Zoro first. Pop. 1 second the swordsman was there, the next, only a bubble of air remained. Vivi screamed. Brook tried to protect Usopp and Sanji. Pop, pop, they were gone. Frankie tried to blast Kuma. Pop, gone. Nami was crying, reaching out to Luffy. Pop, gone. Vivi was alone in the clearing. Kuma towered over her. She looked up at the giant warlord. She didn't attack. She knew it was useless. She looked at Luffy, who was pinned to the ground, screaming in despair, unable to save a single friend. Luffy! Vivi yelled, her voice breaking. Don't give up! We will meet again! Kuma looked at the princess. The paw hit her. The sensation was strange. It wasn't pain, it was weightlessness. The world dissolved into a blur of colors. She was flying. Flying faster than the wind, soaring over the ocean, over islands, over clouds. The flight lasted for days. She was trapped in a paw bubble, alone with her thoughts, terrified for her friends. Finally, the bubble popped. Vivi crashed. She hit the ground hard, rolling through dust and dry grass. She coughed, spitting out dirt. The air was hot, dry. It smelled of sulfur and ancient stone. She stood up, shielding her eyes from the sun. She wasn't in a jungle like Luffy. She wasn't in a spooky castle like Perona. She was in a canyon. Massive red rock walls towered around her. The wind howled through the crevices. She walked for hours, dehydrated and exhausted. She finally saw a structure. It wasn't a village. It was a fortress carved into the cliff face. Flags fluttered from the ramparts. They bore a symbol she didn't recognize. A cross, sword, and shield with a sun motif. Soldiers surrounded her. They didn't wear marine uniforms. They wore desert armor, similar to Alabasta, but older, more primitive. They pointed spears at her. Who are you? A commander shouted. Vivi raised her hands. I am Nefertari Vivi. I am a pirate. The commander squinted. Nefertari? The traitor bloodline? Vivi was confused. Where was she? A man stepped out from the fortress gates. He was old, with a scarred face and a long gray beard. He wore a cloak made of sand-colored fabric. He looked at Vivi with intense, calculating eyes. This is the kingdom of Solara, the old man said. An ancient kingdom in the New World that was erased from history maps. We are the warriors who remember what your ancestors did. Vivi realized with a shock. Kuma hadn't sent her to a random place. He sent her to a place connected to her history, a place that hated her family. The old man threw a wooden sword at her feet. If you want to live, traitor, pick it up. Here, we do not bow to queens. We bow only to strength. Vivi looked at the sword. She looked at the hostile faces. She was alone. No Luffy, no Zoro, no Pell or Chaka. She picked up the sword. Her hands were blistered, but her grip was firm. I am not here to bow, Vivi said, her eyes flashing with the blue fire of determination. I am here to get strong enough to save my captain. The old man smirked. Then survive, girl. Welcome to hell. This was Vivi's destination. Solara, the lost kingdom of sand warriors. A place where hockey was not just a power, but a religion. Here, Vivi would not learn to be a diplomat. She would learn to be a warlord. She would trade her compassion for combat. She would learn to coat her wires in hockey. She would transform from a support fighter into a battlefield commander. The 2-year time skip had begun. The princess was dead. The warrior queen was being forged in the fire of the canyon. Days turned into weeks in the canyon of Solara. Every day was a battle. The warriors of Solara didn't use devil fruits. They used pure martial arts and weapons infused with spirit, what the outside world called Haki. Vivi struggled. She wasn't a monster like Luffy or Zoro. She couldn't punch through boulders. The old master, whose name was General Kale, saw this. He stopped her during a sparring session where she was trying to swing a heavy sword. He knocked her down effortlessly. "Stop trying to be a brute," Kale scolded her. "You are small. You are weak. Accept it." Vivi glared at him from the dust. "I have to be strong for my crew. Strength is not just muscle," Kale said, tapping his temple. "Your ancestors didn't survive the Void Century by punching harder. They survived by outsmarting the gods. You use wires. You control the battlefield. Don't overpower the enemy. Trap them." It was a revelation. Vivi stopped trying to be a fighter like Zoro. She went back to her roots. She focused on her peacock slashers. She learned to weave haki into the thin wires, making them unbreakable and sharp enough to cut steel. She learned observation haki not to predict punches, but to sense the layout of the entire battlefield, to see traps, escape routes, and weak points instantly. She wasn't becoming a tank, she was becoming a master tactician. Then the news coup arrived. It dropped a newspaper into the canyon. Vivi unfolded it. Her heart stopped. A huge picture of Luffy on the front page. He had returned to Marineford. He rang the ox bell 16 times. On his arm, a tattoo. 3D2Y. The message was clear. Not 3 days, 2 years. Vivi clutched the paper to her chest. Tears of relief streamed down her face. Luffy was alive. He wasn't giving up. He was giving them time. Time to be ready for the new world. Vivi stood up. She walked to General KL. She bowed. "I need to stay," Vivi said. "I have 2 years. Teach me everything." KL grinned. "In 2 years, I'll make you dangerous enough to scare a vice admiral." Time montage. We see Vivi sitting on a cliff edge, meditating, sensing the movement of lizards in the canyon below. Observation haki. We see her in a sandstorm, her wires dancing around her, cutting flying rocks into dust. Armament haki infusion on weapons. We see her reading ancient texts in the Solara Library, learning about military strategy and the geography of the new world. She isn't just training her body, she is sharpening her mind to be the ultimate advisor for the Pirate King. 2 years later. The canyon was silent. A group of bandits attacked the fortress, thinking it was an easy target. 50 men charged the gate. A figure stepped out. She wore a long white cloak with a hood, similar to her Baroque works outfit, but more elegant. Her blue hair was longer, tied back in a tactical braid. She held no sword, just her fingers twitching slightly. The bandits charged. The figure moved her hands like a conductor. Invisible wires coated in invisible haki snapped tight across the path. The bandits tripped, their weapons flew out of their hands, and they were tied together in a neat bundle within 10 seconds. Vivi lowered her hands. She didn't even break a sweat. She wasn't overpowered. She couldn't blow up an island, but she had complete control of her environment. "General," Vivi called out, "I'm leaving." Kale stood on the wall. He nodded. "Go, and tell that Straw Hat boy, a queen bows to no one." Vivi smiled. She boarded a small boat provided by the kingdom. She looked at her vivre card. It was moving towards Sabaody. The princess was gone. The strategist of the Straw Hat Pirates was returning. The sails caught the wind. The destination was the archipelago of Bubbles. The fake Straw Hats were there. The Marines were there. But this time, Nefertari Vivi wasn't afraid of admirals or celestials. She had a plan.